Hi YouTube, and thanks for watching this Mastering Typography in After Effects free preview. This is part of a larger course that I've created that you can get access to in a link in the description. So if you like what you're watching, subscribe here, like, but also check out the links so you can see the entire course and also download the project files. Thanks, and I will see you in class. And keep in mind, this is the continuation of the Mastering the Basics course. So if you haven't watched that yet, it's less than an hour long, and the whole thing is up on YouTube as well. So you can give that a look if you've never opened After Effects. But if you're familiar with After Effects, then continue on with this free preview of Mastering Typography. Welcome back. And now that you've learned some of the fundamental skills needed to use After Effects, let's jump into a more specific topic like typography and text in After Effects. So let's create a new composition, and the defaults are fine by me. I'm going to create a background by right-clicking and saying New Solid. I'm going to accept the defaults because I'm going to create a gradient on this solid. So I want to go to the Effects panel here, which is a new way to add effects. Instead of clicking and dragging from over here, you can also right-click in this window. If you don't have this window, you can create it or enable it by going down here to the Effects Controls checkbox. So I'll right-click here, and it'll also give you the most recent used effect at the second option here. But let me show you where it is. I won't take the shortcut here. It's the first time you have seen it. So I'm going to choose Gradient Ramp under Generate. And now we have this black and white gradient ramp, which I can use my handy dandy little color libraries that I've just shown you how to use those as well. So I also want to increase the ramp scatter, because when we export this file as an 8-bit movie file, which we are probably bound to do at some point to compress it and have it be a decent size, file size, it's going to create banding. But if we introduce some scatter, it will not band as bad. The other thing you can do is under project window, you could alt click on the 8-bit and change that to 16 to 32, and that will reduce banding. But again, the final delivery most likely is going to be an 8-bit version. So I like to introduce the scatter into any color gradient that I'm using in After Effects. All right, so I want to select the layer, hit enter, and type in BG for background. And I want to lock it because I don't want to affect it. Now let's get into text. I'm going to right click new and go to text. I'm going to type in my name. By default, it should center it in the composition. And to deselect it, I just deselect the layer down here anywhere. Just click in an empty space. And now I have my name, and I can change everything about this after the fact as well. So if we go to the character tab here, we get all the attributes related to text. So if I double click this again, I could change the font by selecting this, and I could press up and down on the arrow key to cycle through and preview all the different types of fonts that we have installed. You could also install fonts and have those accessible here. You can also type something in. So I know the name of the font. So I can start typing it in, and it'll hone in on that font. I'm going to choose ultralight. You could also isolate, even though this is one layer, you could change different aspects of text. So I want to change my last name to actually be bold. So you can have mix and match different fonts, I don't encourage you to mix fonts like that, but you could, normally what I do is change, these secondary attributes to a font. You could also increase it. Basically anything you can mix and match, even though it's on the same layer. Of course, you could always Control D, duplicate this, and have one name on a layer, and that will be, could be helpful if you want to animate things specifically to that. So we also have the font size. So you can notice as I scale this up, we're not getting any pixelation here. We can see the ramp scatter a little bit, maybe you can see that noise, but we're not getting any pixelation because, again, like I mentioned in one of the earlier lessons, of course, fonts and text is a vector graphic. So no matter how big you scale this, you will never see pixels in it being rasterized the more you scale it up. So I'm going to hit Shift and question mark to get it to fit the window, scale it up, and I'm going to expand this layer, and you can see this is a new category that we haven't had before on an image or a solid. Text has its own category, and there's all kinds of different options we'll get into here at a later date, but I just want to show you that's where that lives. Let's quickly add an animation to this. So the quickest way to do that is to add it from the effects and presets. If we scroll down the animation presets and go to text, we actually have a whole library of options available to us. The only problem with this is it's a little difficult to tell what the effect is going to be without having to try each one. So we could say, fade out slow, that kind of is self-explanatory. And wherever we have our timeline scrubber, that is where the keyframes are going to be added. So we can see here, there are these tiny little circles, and that's because that indicates there are keyframes, but we don't have that category expanded or that attribute expanded in this layer stack here. So if we expand it out, we could maybe find it. Or of course, the other shortcut that we can use is hit U. And now we'll go straight to that range selector. If we double hit U, it'll open up any attribute that has been changed. So now we can see we have this quick animation. We didn't have to do anything. We, just knowing what we know already, if we wanted to happen over a shorter or longer period of time, we can just click and drag this keyframe and we can have it occur over a longer time. So the shortcut for visualizing and previewing these effects, let's say this isn't the one we wanted, we could just delete this animator. And now we're back to the normal text. If we wanted to kind of browse all of these options here, all of these different animations, the way to do that is to open Adobe Bridge. And this is basically the only thing I use Adobe Bridge for, is just to visualize these text animations if I'm in After Effects and I need to do a lot of text animation. So what we can do, because we don't know where these files are kept, we have to have something selected. So let's just select this folder and choose an option here and left click and go Reveal and Explore. So that will open an Explorer window and it gives us the path. So I'm going to copy this path and I'm going to jump back over to Bridge. And I'm going to select this area here to be able to paste that path in. I'll hit enter. And now we have a preview of all this. I'm going to go back up a few levels to the presets folder, and you can just right click and say, add to favorites. I've already added it, so it's over here. So I can just very quickly click it and get into this folder structure. But let's go to the Animate In. And now we can see previews of each one of these effects. So if I select one, I actually have a little preview video that auto plays over here. So I can just kind of scroll through these and find which one I want to do, even just pressing up and down and side to side on the keyboard, and find what type of animation I want to use in my After Effects project. So these are just kind of preset animations. In another lesson, I'm going to show you how to make these from scratch so you have greater control and understand how these are made. So even if you want to start with one of these in your animation, that you will understand how they're made and how you can change these presets even. So they're a great starting point, and they're a great way to get animation straight out of the box by just clicking and dragging onto your text and hit play, and there we go. We have animated text in After Effects. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive a little deeper into these topics. I want to show you how to create this kind of character by character animation for yourself and how all that's done under the hood. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson. An important aspect of any design or animation is precision. And inside of After Effects, there are several different tools we can use to make sure we're being precise. One of the first ones is the ruler. So if we click the composition window to make sure it's selected and hit Control R, we can bring up the rulers. We can also do it from the View tab if we go to Show Rulers, and we can see the hotkeys for all of the different types of guides and rulers that we're about to explore. So with the ruler up, we can actually click the ruler and drag down a guide. And if we let go of it, we can right click and choose Edit Position. And because we know that our composition is 1920 by 1080, we can just divide those numbers by half. So going down, we have 1080, and half of that is going to be 540. So if we hit enter, we can see that this is precisely halfway down. Same way, we can choose a vertical guide and place it in the center, right click and say Edit Position, 960. And we can also check that's the center by going down to this little icon here, choose Grid and Guide Options. We can actually turn on what's called a Title Action Safe. By selecting this, we can see crosshairs in the center of the composition, as well as these other rectangular guides. These harken back to an older system. There were different sizes of TVs, and to ensure that the action you wanted to be seen and the titles that you wanted to be seen had to fall within these two rectangles. The larger rectangle is the action safe area. Everything within that is most likely safe. And everything within this inner rectangle is the title safe area. So we never want text to go beyond this area. Now, in the age of the internet and phones and all of that, this is a less important consideration since most media isn't necessarily going to be displayed on TV. It's usually going on the internet, and this is less of a concern. But it is also a way to standardize spacing, and it's just also another kind of guide to have inside of After Effects, like seeing the center with these crosshairs. But we have these guides laid out, so we don't necessarily need this title action safe. And we can also temporarily hide the guides. Let's say we have some animation occurring and they're kind of distracting to seeing the preview animation. With our cursor selected here, we can actually just hit Control and semicolon on the keyboard to temporarily toggle it on and off. And we can also clear the guides by clicking and dragging them up, or we can go to View and go down to Clear Guides. And now we have a clean space. The other thing is if we had a red color, those guides are red, which actually changed because I think the default is very similar to this purple color I have. We can go to Edit Preferences and Grids and Guides, and we can change the color of the guides. So you can see if we change it to that purple, we're not going to be able to see it that well. So we want to make sure that our guides are a color that we can actually see. So the other attributes in here are for the grid. So let me just change this back to a red, and just be aware that if you want to adjust the grid size, you can do that from this same preferences menu. So let's go down to grid. And this is also another good way to help organize your designs, as well as the proportional grid is a little larger, and it's I believe it's evenly spaced basically between these lines. So the other things we have at our disposal are the align tools on the right hand side here. So let's say we have our text and it gets off centered a little bit and we wanted to get it back centered. We can actually just use these align buttons to center them horizontally and vertically. The other thing we can do is if we have multiple objects, let's just create a duplicate by hitting Control D. I'm going to hold down Shift and click and drag a copy down. I'm going to make another one and hit Control. So select that one and hit Shift and drag it up somewhere. So I want these evenly distributed. So all I have to do is select all of them. And then now we have what was grayed out is now active, and we can distribute layers evenly between each other. So if I was to change the distance again here, all I have to do is just select all of them again and redistribute them to make sure they are equidistant from each other. So those are some of the tools we have at our disposal to make sure we're being precise, And you can access a lot of these preferences here as well. So for example, if we have a grid, the default is it's going to snap to that grid. So as we get close to it, it'll pop to it. If we don't want that to occur, all we have to do is just turn those preferences off, snap to guides. So, and then this is, of course, the toggle shortcut that we've already seen and used. So this is a great way to make sure that your designs are precise and exactly where you want them to be. If you're doing grid layouts or some type of other design theory or concept, you can use these to your advantage. Thanks for watching. In the next lesson, we're going to jump back in to creating more text animation. Thanks for watching. Welcome back. And now that we've learned where the presets are, how to use the preset animations from the effects panel, let's create our own from scratch and start to begin to understand how those presets are made. And so if we use a preset, we know how to customize it for our own usage. So let's go over to our text layer and twirl down the layer with the little arrows here. And let's go to the text layer here, and we can see to the right of that, there's this little area that says animate, and there's another arrow in a circle. Click that circle and you get a menu here. And these are all the animatable attributes that we can use. So let's just pick a couple and start to animate our text. I'm going to click scale for this. And you can see that there are a few more options that have shown up down here. So under text now, it's twirled text down. We can see the animator category. We have a range selector, and now we have scale because that's the attribute that we chose. Now, if we wanted to affect more attributes in the range that we're going to choose, we just need to have the animator selected and keep adding to it either here or here. So we can keep adding properties to this single range selector. And what a range selector is if you watch these two red lines here, they're hard to see because they're at either end of the text right now. But as soon as I change the start or end values, you can see them jump in from either side. So that's selecting a range of text that the attribute we're changing is going to affect. So the easiest way to understand that is to see it. So let's change the scale to something very small. So let's scale everything down, and that's going to be our starting value. We want it fairly small so that we can't even see it. And when we scrub the timeline, nothing happens because we haven't animated anything yet. So we can either choose to animate the start and end, but what I tend to like to do, if I'm not having to target individual letters, is I like to animate the offset because it's just more efficient. Instead of having to animate two different attributes, you can just animate one. And that can also be the case here. If we were to animate this one, it'll go from left to right. But if we use offset, we can go from left to right or right to left with one attribute. So I tend to like to use offset a little more frequently than the start and end values. I will say the positive thing about start and end values is if you want to target a certain area, you can do that here, right? So you can go in and hone in and maybe come from either side. But because we're going to go from left to right, let's just use offset. So we click the stopwatch here. We've set a keyframe at the first frame of our timeline. I'm going to move the current time indicator down to 2 seconds in time, and I'm just going to drag this to 100%. Now, when I play this back, you can see it's animating in by character, and we have our first custom animation that we've made ourselves. And this is how the presets are made. If you apply some of these text presets, you can go into the text layer by hitting U and find where those keyframes have been made. So you can use these presets as a starting point and then adjust them for the length of your text or change the speed at which they happen. So let's dive a little deeper into this so we can understand what's really happening, because right now we have as basic of an animation as you can get. We just have 2 keyframes, but let's say we want to begin to build on this. We want some overshoot like we've done before in the quick start After Effects lessons. So because each letter stops so abruptly, we could adjust that by the advanced tab down here and create ease in and ease out. So under the advanced tab, you can say based on characters, based on words. So it could go word by word. it's it's that intelligent that it would know where spaces are, and it divides words by those spaces. So we can adjust those attributes here. But one of the animation attributes that I'm interested in, to stop it from being so abrupt when it hits the top of a letter, it's an even spacing. It's a linear interpolation. I want it to have a little ease in at the top. So I'm going to choose a place in my timeline, one frame before that a letter hits its final position. So I'm going to just hold down Alt and middle mouse scroll so I get a little closer, and I'm going to hold down middle click on my mouse. Now I can pan around. So it gets a little bit easier to pop between keyframes when you're zoomed in like this. So I want to go to a frame right before the S ends, just so I can see how this change is going to affect it when I take ease low and I scale it up to 100. So what that is going to do is going to ease in at the top. See how there's many more kind of steps to it stopping at the top? There's one right there, and it's going to, pop on a little more. We could create more time so it has more time to interpolate between the letters. So we can just click and drag this keyframe out. And so it will slow down at the top for us now that we've created that ease low attribute. So now it's a lot softer ending, and it just feels a lot better. So I want to add to this animation though. So I'm just going to turn this off for now. I'm going to go back to 0 on ease low, and I want to add an overshoot. So how do we add more animation? Because we only have one keyframe to animate. So, how do we create some animation for this as it's going character by character? Well, we can actually duplicate this animator and then offset it. So let me show you what I mean. And first, I want to rename this animator so we can keep track and organized of what we're doing. So I'm going to call this scale 1. And I'm hitting enter on my keyboard to rename this. And I'm just going to duplicate it with Control D. And now we have scale 2. So I'm going to twirl that down, and I'm going to, instead on scale of going to 2, I want to go to something. Let me go to the end of the animation so we can see it take effect. And let's change the range selector so that we turn this off. I'm just going to hit the stopwatch there and turn that back to 0. So we're kind of resetting these attributes. And I want the overshoot to go past 100% because it's an overshoot. It's going past where it's going to stop. So we have a little settle in our animation. So let's go past 100. And I'm just watching right now. I don't want the overshoots to go past where they could intersect with letters. So I'm looking between the D and the L. Just from a kind of design standpoint, I don't want things overlapping. So I'm going to go as far as I can without letters starting to intersect with each other. So that's about 124 for this font and font size. So now when I go back to this keyframe that we match up with this range selector, I'm going to turn on the offset again. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to turn this keyframe on here. So I'm going to click this little button to add or remove a keyframe. Right now we're adding one. And then I'm going to hit K on my keyboard to jump forward to the end keyframe. And I'm just going to bring that to 100%. So let's turn this scale off to remind ourselves what we're doing. I'm just going to hit this little eye icon right here. So now we're just watching the first effector, and the animation is scaling up the text because we're starting from a 2%. And in the second scale, we're going beyond 100%. So we're going much higher. So these two values are going to be kind of combating each other when these keyframes are on the same frame range. So what we can do, let's turn on scale 2 now. Let's offset these keys by as much as we want the overshoot to occur. So let's go maybe 3 keyframes or 4 keyframes down. And that's how much of an overshoot we're going to get. That difference in time between these keyframes for each letter is where we're going to go from 2% to 124. And as it finishes going through the offset, we are going to go back to 100% because we're basically turning off the offset. We're just kind of scrubbing through the text with these effects. And because one is happening after the other, it appears as though it's being overshoot, and it is overshooting the animation. So I'm going to maybe bring back the animation, the keyframes a little bit because the overshoot is a little slow right now. So I think I'm looking at maybe 3 frames difference. So now we have the animation overshooting with 2 different customizable effectors. So let's keep adding to it. You don't have to stop here. You can just keep adding effects to this. So let's add another animatable attribute. Let's add rotation now. So now we have another animator, and I'm going to rename that to rotation by hitting enter and typing in rotation, and hit enter again to confirm that change. And I want to go to the end of the timeline because I want to be able to see the change that's going to happen when I click and drag the rotation values. Let's pick somewhere. We're basically picking the starting position. So let's pick something not all the way 90 degrees because, again, I don't want the letters to begin to intersect with each other. So now that we've picked the start position, let's do the same thing we've done before. Go to the range selector, keyframe this offset, and then we'll go down to match this other keyframe, the first one we did. So we have the same amount of time that each of these is occurring, and go to 100%. So again, these are occurring at the same time, but that's okay because it's a different attribute. So they can actually happen at the same time and they're not combating each other like 2 different scale attributes would be combating each other because that's the same attribute. But because we're introducing a new attribute, the rotation attribute, we could do that over the same length of keyframes here. Or we could offset it. If we want the rotation to happen, for longer, we could delay this. So let's just bring it back a few keyframes, maybe in line with the second scale. So we're seeing more of the rotation for longer, the more we delay that keyframe. So we could even go past the second scale if we want the rotation to happen after all the scaling is done. But I kind of like it to be in conjunction with the overshoot, that, that's part of the settle in that motion. So I like this, but I think we also need a settle on the rotation. So let's do the same thing we did before. Let's select the rotation attribute here, Control D to duplicate it. And then instead of going plus 31, I just want to go to the other side of the range. So we're going to go negative and do, something very small, -10, because we were at positive 30. So let's go like -10. And then we need to offset this same way that we did with the scale. So I'm going to toggle down the range selector for this, and I'm just going to click and drag these 3 frames to the right. So it's going to be delayed. So now we have a settle in the scale and in the rotation. And there's a lot of attributes here. I'm just going to hit the tilde key, which is the keyboard button to the left of the number 1 to maximize this screen. You can see there's a lot of things going on here and why it's important to rename these attributes so we can keep track of which one is which. Another way to organize this, again, is to use the shortcut U, so it'll only bring up the attributes that have been animated. We can also double tap U, and it will bring up all of the attributes that have been changed, even the ones that don't have keys on them. So now we can see which one is which. And I'm just going to grab the rotations. I'm going to hit the tilde key again, and I'm going to delay this a little bit and play with the animation. Now, one of the great things about this is we have this animation completed. Let's scroll down the text. Let's change the text and see what happens. It still works. So this is something that would be considered procedural animation. We're not having to go back in and recreate this every time if we want to change the text. Now, what this also means is we could duplicate this layer with Control D. I'm going to hit P on the keyboard to pull up position, drag this down, and make some more text. We can copy and paste this in other text layers. So we only need to make these animations once. So because I duplicated this, it's already going to have these attributes animated, but let me just delete those to show you that it will still work if you copy and paste. So I'm going to scroll this down, I'm going to drop these down so we can see it a little more organized. I'm going to click the first one and then shift click the last one, hit Control C, and then select the top text layer and hit Control V. Now it will paste the keyframes wherever your scrub head is. So I'm going to undo that and go where the welcome sign is done. And then I'm going to hit paste on this text layer. So it's going to insert those keyframes wherever the current timeline indicator is resting. So now we have welcome students. And again, it's very easy to just adjust the animation. If we select both of these layers, press U one time, we can grab these keyframes by click dragging select. I'm going to shift and click drag those as well so we can see they're both blue. And I'm just going to click and drag these down so that everything happens a little bit faster. And then now, because we created a gap between these two words, I'm just going to click and drag these keyframes and drag them down somewhere closer to the first word. So now you can see how you can quickly create your own custom text animation that you can use between all of your projects. So your assignment for this lesson is to create your own custom animation using these new tools by clicking animate and choosing which one of these attributes that you want to begin to animate. Set keyframes and create something that you can use again and again. And I look forward to seeing your work. Thanks for sharing, and I will see you in the next lesson. All right, now let's tie everything together in a lower third project. So let's begin with a new composition and call this lower third. And 920 by 1080 is fine, 24 frames a second, and 20 seconds is fine. So what we're going to do is create a lower third, which is what is normally below a person speaking. So here I have a little temp project in Premiere, and I want to create a lower third for it. And imagine that I'm going to have many more people speaking, and I want something that's basically a template that I can use over and over again and change the names in Premiere. So I want to make it in After Effects so that I can use it in Premiere. So let's turn on our black background just so we can see our text. Let's go to New Text, and I'm going to, again, type my name. And then I'm going to make another text layer and type in instructor. And instead of hitting enter, I'm just going to click over here to finish typing. So I'm going to drop this below by hitting P on with the layer selected, drop it down. Then I'm going to select both layers, and I'm going to turn on title action safe so I can see where I'm going. And typically you don't want to move text beyond this innermost long rectangle. That is another TV standard. The further one out is called the action safe. So when TVs were of different sizes, you used to have to abide by these norms so that any text that you wanted to be seen on screen, you knew would fit on every TV, most every TV, if it was in the title safe area. And this is the action safe area out here, meaning that's where action could take place and you should be able to still see it. I kind of like my lower thirds now where the action safe is, just because I think that's a little more realistic in this day and age to expect that people are probably going to be watching this online anyways. And so these are kind of a archaic holdover from trying to make things for television. But if you are making things for television, just know that that's what that is. Right now, I'm just using it as a guide to help me organize my lower thirds here. So I'm going to create a quick little background for this with a solid. So right-clicking New Solid, that's fine. I'm going to call this BG and hit OK. And instead of creating a ramp, I just wanted to do another way by creating a layer style by going to Gradient Overlay. And I can get to the settings here by toggling down Gradient Overlay, go to Edit Gradient. And now I can click my two colors I want to use. And the top row is opacity, the bottom row is the color. So I just need to select the other color here and select the picker again, select that, hit OK. And because this is set to align with layers, that means it is going to stretch the whole width of the layer.
I'm going to hit V to pull up the selection tool and just scale this down. And I'm going to toggle down this layer so I can see it and put it at the bottom. So now I'm just going to click and drag that down. I'm also holding Shift for it to snap to the Y-axis. Control plus to zoom in. And I'm just going to scale this down a little bit more. And then I'm also going to hit Control R to pull up my rulers and hit just a little ruler in between my two names because that's where I want it to center on. And click Shift, drag it to the ruler, and then pull that off. So now we have a lower third with a background. I'm just going to pump up that background a little bit and add some animation to it. So I'm going to create a mask. I'm going to start way out here because I know I'm going to feather this mask, and I don't want the feather to affect this edge. I want this edge to be sharp. So I want to click way over here so that the mask, the feather of the mask rather, is not going to affect this edge. So when I hit MM, it should pull up all of the mask properties. Might have to do it twice, like I just had to, if it's not open at all. And then I'm just going to click and drag the feather aspect attribute, that is, and then hit V to pull up the selection tool, Shift click these two vertices of this, and then just drag this down. So this is how I want it to end up looking. I might drag it back out just a little bit because I don't know how long people's names are going to be. And I'm going to animate this mask. So I'm going to set a keyframe on mask path. And I want to drag it out maybe 2 seconds. And that's going to be the end position. So now, because my scrubber is still on frame 0, I'm going to set the start position. So I'm just going to drag this just over off screen because remember it's feathering. So we still have a little bit of that purple. I need to drag it further until we no longer see the portion that's feathered. Maybe just a little bit more for safety. And then I want to easy ease that and also right click, go to keyframe velocity and maybe do something fairly strong like 75 so that it eases in very slowly at the end of that animation. So the next thing to do is to animate the text. So just for speed's sake, I'm going to choose one of our presets down here. I'm going to fade up by character on each of these. And I'm going to select both of them, hit U, and I want this to go a little faster than 2 seconds. So I'm going to drag them down to 2. And I want the instructor, just for OCD's sake, I'm going to put this below because that's how it's arranged in the composition. And I'm going to click drag these two keyframes and have them start just after this one is almost done. The other thing I want to do is change the color of this text so it's not all white. I'm just going to toggle down the effects and presets so it's easier to see everything. Click and drag down here. And now we have the name is going to be that color. I need to add the fill. So fill color, and I need to add RGB here. So we can add this later on. So let me actually select the color from that. And so now we have a little bit of animation. I want to delay the text because I want it to start after the fade on has almost had a chance to come on first. Then I can just click and drag this to wherever looks appropriate so it has a background to animate onto. And I'm also just going to do a quick little animation on the scale of the background just to add a little more animation. So in most projects or animations or motion graphics, it's just a matter of layering animation on. So we have the mask animating on, but I wanted to do something a little more interesting. So I'm going to animate the scale on the y-axis. So I need to check off this keychain here for the scale, which I got it by hitting S on this layer. And I'm going to hit a keyframe here just because, again, I want that to be my end position. And I want to start fairly low. And I want these to be done by the time the letters have started to come on. So around in there is reasonable. And I want that to overshoot twice. So I'm going to hit 2 more keyframes, or I could copy paste that keyframe. And I want it to overshoot. So I'm going to hit J to toggle between these keyframes. The first one to go above this, I want it to go past. I'm holding down Control, click, drag. Then the next one, I want it to go below the in position. And then I'm going to easy ease these. And I'm also going to add a little keyframe velocity on both of these. So that's the in and out point. So now we have a little bit of animation, more interesting. This is a little aggressive, so I'm just going to take these keyframes and spread them out a little bit. So now we have something that's just adding a little more visual interest than it just wiping on. It's actually scaling up and wiping on at the same time. Great, so now we have our lower third. So to create a template, the Premiere is going to understand what attributes of this lower third that we want to be able to edit. We need to tell it that now. So let's toggle down one of these layers and right click on the text attribute and go to Open in Essential Graphics. So now we can name this is going to be the lower third. And I'm just going to give it a version 1, just so we have something else that tells us what it is. I'm going to solo the supported properties, and you can tell in the attributes down here that it has toggled down what we can actually include in our template. So I'm going to drag this up so we can see more of it. And I want to be able to change the source text because that's what the name is loaded into. So if I just click and drag that in, you can see it has Lucas Ridley here. And I want to be able to do that to the other text here as well. So this first one is going to be called name. And then the one below it is going to be called title. And I'm also going to include the fill color just so you can see, we can add other things besides just changing the text. And like I said, just by clicking this, you'll be able to see what all other properties you can click and drag to template here. So I'm going to save this project first before I export the motion graphics template, because that is a part of this process. So now that we have this project saved, we can export the motion graphics template. I'm going to send it to the local templates folder, but you can choose somewhere else if you'd like. You might get this error that's just warning you about having After Effects installed on any other computer that you use for this motion graphics template. And also if you use any special fonts. So again, if you're going from computer to computer, you might get another warning like that. So now if we jump over to Premiere and open our Essential Graphics window right here, and it should pop up over here. And I'll use the search window here just to find my template. There it is. And I'm just going to click and drag it into this project on a new layer. It's going to sync very quickly. And now we have our lower third. If I click on this item, now we can see that we actually have attributes we can edit. So if I change the name, I can also change the title. And you can see it dynamically update in Premiere. So that is how you create lower thirds that you can use in Premiere as templates. Now, the animation you apply to this can be more complicated, of course, and you can add more attributes here, but you get the gist of it, and it's a pretty powerful tool to help your pipeline and to work within a team that's dependent on being efficient with creating and using assets. And if we wanted to use this in After Effects, we could do that as well. Let's rename this to include the suffix template. And now I have that same kind of video here. You could use whatever video that you're working with, interviews or yourself like me in front of camera. And so we have this new composition called promo, and I want to include this lower third. And let's imagine my name is something more exciting like Tom Cruise. And let's change it to that. So I'm going to use the left open bracket to jump it to the CTI, which is the current time indicator. And then I'm just going to scrub it back after the animation is done playing so we can see the changes. So where this change occurs is if we toggle this layer down, we now have master properties. Because this is a pre-composition of this, we're basically nesting this inside. And so this allows us to have access to those attributes that are basically templated, that we decided we wanted to be templated. So what we need to do is do not go back to the Windows Essential Graphics window. We're done with that once we've created the template. And where we need to make these changes is by right-clicking. So you right-click here and say Edit Value. So let's say Tom Cruise, and I'll hit OK. Now we have that change. And if we go back to the original composition, that change does not exist here because it's a template and we've only affected the master properties of this pre-composition. So we could do this over and over again, keep dragging this into new compositions with new interviews, new people, and change their name every time by right-clicking and editing the value, changing the color, changing the title, all these kinds of fun things. So that's also how you can use it inside of After Effects. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, I want to show you how to have complete control over your animated letters. And how we do that is after we create text, we can right-click on the text and choose Create either Shapes from Text or Masks from Text. First, I'm going to do masks to show you what that looks like. So now you can see that there are masks that are now creating the letters of this. It has created a new layer as well that these outlines live on, which are the masks for this, basically a solid. And if I hit M, it will pull up all of the masks of this layer. If I click the first one and then scroll down and shift click that one, it will collapse all of these at the same time if I collapse them. And you can see there's a mask for each letter of the name. And also keep in mind here, where there are holes in letters, there's going to be 2. So you can see 2 Ds here. Now, this is kind of a personal preference and depends on what actually you're trying to achieve when doing this. But the general idea is that now you have these masks that you can manipulate. But before you start to manipulate them, you want to make sure that you set a keyframe on the paths for this. So I'm going to hit M one more time on the keyboard to bring up just the mask path. I'm going to, again, scroll to the bottom, shift click the bottom one. I'm going to bring the scrubber out and then hit the stopwatch to create a keyframe on all of these masks. So that'll be the end position. So when we scrub back to frame 0, we can freely kind of affect these paths and start to animate them in whatever way that we want to. So we can make these changes, and when we start to scrub, we'll be able to see these changes occur. Now, again, this is the mask version. So that is the animation I've created very quickly. But again, it gives you complete control over what the text is. We have the end position, so we know we're staying true to whatever font we're using. And that's going to be accurate to that font. But before or after that point, now we have complete control over what the shapes of those letters are going to be. The other way to do that, again, is if we right-click on the text again after deleting that first example, I can go back to Create and then Shapes from Text. So that'll create a shapes layer. And it isn't white because it's actually having a fill that it's taking from the font. So it's a little more intelligent of an operation. And there's a lot more you can do just in general with shapes. So again, we see the contents of this shapes layer is all of the letters. So if we toggle down L, for example, we have everything that you would expect and it's named correctly. We have the path. The one thing that you don't need is the stroke, since it is actually just a filled object. So if we delete the stroke, nothing will happen because it's the fill that matters for this. So we can go through the exact same thing. And I want you to, in this assignment, create your name and then get creative about how you're going to morph your letters from a start position to this end position, or this could be your start position and you animate a morph out of these letters. So I'm going to take a few minutes and actually animate this just so you get to see a little bit of a demonstration of me actually working and doing it in real time and talking a little bit through my work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. I'm going to use the paths option here. So I'm just going to stick with this. I've already made a couple of guide layers here. And now I just need to access the paths here. So I'm just going to type in path. And that's the quickest way to access all of these paths. Unfortunately, there is not a shortcut for this, but I'm going to click and drag. If you click and drag, you can actually do more than one. I'm going to hit the tilde key to expand this out temporarily and just click and drag this down. Now I'm going to click the tilde key again to minimize that. And I have the end position. So now I can kind of go free form and just do my thing and not worry about messing up the final artwork of these letters. So I'm going to work kind of quick. I'm not going to be completely exact here, but I'm going to do my best to create fairly uniform squares here. Bring this down. The problem with so this guide is popping in between these two, so I'm going to type it in manually. Okay. So now I have a more accurate guide. You can see how before it was popping in between and it was fairly annoying. I'm just going to keep, actually I don't need one for that. All of these are going to go up. So very quickly drag all of this up. It doesn't have to be very pretty right now. All of these should snap because I have my snapping options on. And I'm also just going to change this to a different color so I can actually see these while I'm working on them. And I'm going to pull up the pen tool as well by hitting G and hold down Alt and click these to make them have no tangents, excuse me. And those tangents will be animated just like anything else during this process. So just select all of them and try to get them more in line with that square. So now we can just quickly see what this process is doing for us already. We already have this kind of animation. So it's a little slow right now, but of course we can change that later. And I do want these two. Let's see, I think probably the easiest way would be doing this like that. Just holding down Shift and then holding Alt to get those to square off. So again, holding Shift, I'm going to square it off before I do that so it's a little easier. Just clicking multiple times finally gets it. And let's do this again. So you can see it's fairly repetitive, and this is basically what working in After Effects is like. You have to do things over and over, and this is just part of the work. Some of this is not as glamorous as it seems, especially if you consider the fact that this is for like, a couple of seconds of animation, and you're going to work on this thing for, maybe a couple of hours. Hopefully this lesson is not that long. This is why I try not to do demonstrations that often, just because I don't like very long tutorials. like I'm annoyed by them. I try not to do them in my teaching either. But sometimes I'll get feedback that students want to see the whole process, which I can understand. But I think for the majority of people, accidentally grabbing the whole thing. So let me hit Control, click away, and then click again. But I think for most people, they want quick solutions. And I'm hitting Shift to keep it straight over, just to deal with this small discrepancy. I drag these kind of far away because I'm also thinking they're going to go in a linear line. I don't want them to kind of be here. I guess they could. It's kind of up to whatever you want to do. You know what? I might actually do that because this one is really going to be the troublemaker because it needs to go past that one. So you kind of think about this stuff on the fly. I haven't actually done this before doing this lesson, so I wanted to actually show what it was like, working in real time and solving problems, because that is the majority of animation. I keep double clicking things, and so it'll bring up the free transform. And because I have all these guides and I'm working on a square, the free transform is kind of hidden visually. So I'm having to select off of it, select back on. And that's just me being clumsy with the mouse. I think I did it again. Oh no, I just hit G twice. All right. G feather tool. When I did not want that. So again, I'm just holding Alt to get the little manipulator one. And let's do that there. You see I'm getting a little more efficient as I do it, learning. The one thing you don't want to do is move the timeline or forget where you were on like one letter and then have the timeline over here. You can move it back, but you definitely don't want to be here and then lose your final pose. So always be double checking that you're down here. For these letters, I'm probably just going to scale down to 0-ish, and that should be enough, I think. So, okay, I got the pen tool. Again, I'm hitting G too many times, so it's pulling up the feather pen tool. That's all fine. Drag this down. I get a little more sloppy here just for speed's sake. So we're going to move kind of fast. Hit double click that. So I need to control click off. So it's a lot of back and forth, me being clumsy with the, so hold down Alt and Shift. Sorry, Control and Shift. It's, me just being clumsy with the tools because it is a lot to deal with. So I'm just going to scale that to 0-ish. Let's see if that's enough. And again, you can click this little mask path. It'll work for shapes as well. You can see you can't see that thing. That works great. And then for this one, might be a little more tricky because it's as curvy as you can get, and it has a lot of negative space. So let's do this very quickly. Okay. G. And let's start. Oh, I was hitting Control instead of Alt. I think ones. It's not necessary for me to really take the tangents out of these. I'm just I feel more safe doing it that way. It gives me a little more space there. If that tangent was there, it'd be intersecting down there. And it just prevents me from having to, click and drag and make the tangents all nice for the edge. So it's also a speed consideration. This is just way faster to just get rid of those tangents on these keyframes. And because the guides here, go around here somewhere. It's also making it fast that I can snap these to the guides. So Alt-click to kill the tangents. Alt-click. Again, this is the pen tool, which the shortcut is G. Alt-click, and then get this one down, get that one down, kill these tangents, snap, snap. Okay, so I think we have the first letter. So I'm going to hit Control and colon, and now I think this looks pretty cool. What I'm going to do is easy ease these. I hit tilde. Let's see, it's down to this one. Let's just drop these down. So it's these, F9, right click, keyframe velocity. I'm going to do 66. Okay, tilde key. And now, interesting, the S is going so much quicker than the other ones. I might just delay this S keyframe. Oh, because because I left it out of the easy ease moment here. That's why it's going so much quicker. All right, so now everything should be animating together. And of course, you could do, if you didn't like how something's looking here, you could do what would be called like an in-between. You go, I would start at 50% and then repose basically these tangents, however you want them to look. So for example, if we wanted, this is kind of not looking great, I could do an in-between pose here and clean this up a little bit to make it look better. And just try to aid that animation. I think the A can also benefit from it if we went halfway and maybe started these tangents a little earlier. Something like that, around, make this a little softer. So you could go through and set in between keyframes like that if you wanted to affect what this animation is looking like. So I'm going to do my last name, and the other thing you could do is just offset all of these. So you click and drag and just go one by one, offset them by a few frames a piece. But I'm going to leave you to do your last name by yourself. What I'm going to do is basically just way more simple than what we just did. Just kind of click and drag all of the vertices or the points above a certain line and drag them up. and then so basically animating it in reverse, it will look like big streaks of lines come down, and then the top finishes it off. So that's the plan. I'm going to speed that up really quickly just so you get a quick overview, but that's the plan. Do this for yourself. Do it for your own name or some other text as the assignment for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Welcome to Morphing Letters. And we're also going to morph a word. We're going to morph fail into learn. And if you open up this project file, just make sure you have the Chunk 5 font installed on your machine. It's included in the project files as well. And I've created a little starting point for us where we're going to change the word fail into the word learn. All right. So let me just enable both of these visibilities, and I'm going to drag this word down just so we can take a look at both of them. And the first thing that strikes me is the fact that learn has one more letter than fail, but there is similar letters here. We have an A and an A, and they're both in the center, and we have an L and an L. So the way I'm thinking about this is we take the L and we slide it to the left, and we morph the F into an E, and we morph the I into an R. And the N could pop out when the L is sliding over. So the L could kind of reveal the N behind it. And that could also morph in. So say there's like a duplicate version of the L here or something like that. We can just kind of see how it looks as we go along here. So that's the first thing I noticed. So when I approach something like this, I know I'm going to need to separate the letters out, and that these text layers are actually just going to be used for reference points. So let's get started. I'm going to undo what I just did. So they're roughly in the same area. I'm going to change the mode to difference so I can start to line these up a little bit better. So what that does is I can see wherever it's turning black, there's overlapping color there. So I can just move one or the other words into position so that at least the A's match up. And then we can work with the other letters a little easier. All right, so now we want to convert these into paths. So I can select Learn, go to Layer, Create, Convert Shapes from Text, and I want to do the same thing for Fail. Layer, Create, Shapes from Text. So the first thing I want to do is deal with the fact that the L needs to come over here and match this L on the left side. So to do that, it needs to get either around these letters or these letters need to pop up this way. So I think it would be better if these letters popped up. So what I'm going to do is toggle into the contents, and you can see that we have a group for each one of the letters. Now what I can do is actually animate the transform of each one of these. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a keyframe here. And I'm going to add a keyframe on the I. Hit a keyframe on the I. Let's not forget the F as well. On the position. And on the L. So let's get the general movement down. So now I can select this and hit U and have a more condensed view of what I'm going to be animating. I'm going to go forward to maybe the first second or maybe even 2 seconds in, so I have a little more time. Because anytime you're doing animation, the eyes need to rest and read what's going on before any movement happens. So we need a little buffer zone first. Then I'm going to jump forward here. So let's move all 3 of these up. I can just grab the first one and find a good spot for it here. And then take that value, copy and paste it in Y values below. So now we have the L, which can go to the left. That's when we want to pull up this lower layer so we can see where it's going to be going. And it can be transported to the right area. We can actually just move this one above it so we can see it on the difference mode a little bit easier. So that looks pretty close. So now we have one letter already done, but we need to make it look a little more interesting. So let's anticipate this motion by doing the opposite of the direction it's going to be going. So I'm going to turn off this reference part. So I'm going to go back a few frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to copy paste these start positions. I'm going to jump back to this frame and just move everything in the opposite direction it's going to be going. So 20 on the Y, 20 on the Y for that one. And then the L is going to be going in the opposite direction this way. So maybe 20 as well, but in the X. So now when we animate this, and I'm going to easy ease these, we have a little anticipation before they start moving. Compress the time here so everything moves a bit quicker. And I'm going to wait to do the L until everything else is finished. So I'm going to compress the time on these so that they will be out of the way by the time the L gets there. And I'm just going to copy and paste those end frames and also overshoot them. So I'm going to go negative 320 and copy and paste that here. So now we have a bit of an overshoot and a settle here on these as they get bumped up and the L slides over. Then we can overshoot the end of the L as well. So go forward a few frames, copy paste that position, jump back, and then do the overshoot. So I can go to the left just a little bit. I'm going to easy ease that as well. And then we can bring these letters back down. We can actually copy all of the existing keyframes, paste them, go to Keyframe Assistant, Time Reverse Keyframes. So now we can use the animation we've already done, and it can be used again. Get it back into the original position. Let's do that right after the L is about to finish in its position. Let's just bring that over a little bit more. Now we're almost there. We need to add a new letter. So let's grab the Learn Outlines, toggle this down, and we're going to toggle down to the N. And for this, I want to set a keyframe here because I want this path. So I'm going to copy this keyframe, I'm going to twirl this back down. Now, I want to duplicate the L because I want the N to transform out of the L here, a duplicate of the L. While that L is moving over, we can have one kind of morph here out. All right. So maybe it can morph out before the L starts moving, or it can get thrown out to the side. So let's twirl this down so we can get to the L group and duplicate it. So here's the L group, Control D. Now we have L2. I'm going to call this N by hitting Enter. I could also just drag it down if I wanted to be even more organized. So I can go to this stroke path and I can keyframe it. Then I can go forward a few frames and paste the N. So the N is very much spazzing out. And we need to delete the transformation animation we have here. So I'm just going to click the stopwatch. And we can grab the N and move it back into place where it should be on the kind of reference outline here. So we have the path. I'm going to double click the outline with the selection tool, shift left arrow it into position here. Now, it's still going to be a very odd morph. We can just turn off this reference layer here from this one to this one. Now I'm going to turn off all these other ones so we can focus on just these letters for now. So what's happening is we have a very bizarre morph happening on this path. So if we take a look at the actual path, you can see if I adjust the color of this to, let's maybe do a red. If I select this path, you can see that of all of these points, this one kind of stands out right here. That means that's the first point. Now, if we scrub forward to the end, you can see that the first point for the N is this point. So what we want to do is adjust that so that the first point matches closer to this. So let's toggle this down so we can use the shortcuts J and K to toggle between them. And what we want to do is select this point, right click, mask and shape path, and go to set first vertex. I'll go to that again just so you don't miss that. Set for first vertex. Now you can see that that square moved over to the left side, and now it's matching the point in the L. So now when I scrub, this should look a little bit better. We still have a lot of cleanup to do. And if I drag this keyframe out, we can see what is morphing into what a little bit better. So now we can set the in-between keyframes to morph in a better way. So let's go in between, about halfway in between, and start to adjust these paths. Now, it's a bit confusing now, so we need to toggle back and forth. So I'm going to set a keyframe and then use J and K to kind of see which path goes to where. If I select one, it should show me where it ends up. So that one is in the corner, and it is in the corner here. So keep this down and move this up. And as I scrub, you can kind of see the other areas that are going to be a bit of trouble. So what we can do is move these out of the way so that they're not overlapping each other when this morphs. The main issue I'm finding is this point here is going way far down. So we need to bring this back So it's in more of a straight line. And we can even try to keep this line going here. It almost kind of looks like a boot. So now you can start to see how we can slowly clean this up. Anywhere that there's overlap between keyframes, we can try to move them further apart from each other so that they don't interact. Now I'm going to hit G and then hold down Alt, and then I can start to affect also the tangents in case I wanted to make them a little more soft. So I also need to clean up this area and possibly move this down further so that these aren't going at a higher angle down towards this area. So now they're kind of passing beneath the points that are going to be above it. So this point will be above the ones to the left of it. So maybe I can move it more out of the way to the right. So this is just kind of playing with these shapes and seeing what works. And every letter is going to be a little bit different. So now you can see we've gone just far enough that now these two vertices kind of pass each other. And now we can adjust the left side here. So let's jump over here and see where they're intersecting. So the point I'm watching is this one, and it's going from kind of the corner up through the shape. So we need to pull it down so it misses all of these points. And now we can kind of clean this area up. And we want this point to be far enough to the right that it doesn't hit any of these other vertices as they transition. So now we have a much cleaner morph transition here. Now, all this is about is just now adjusting and smoothing these out. So right now we only have 2 keyframes, and of course you could create many, many more, but you want to start with as few as possible and then build them up. I'm going to resharpen these points because with this font, it looks a bit odd for it to have curved areas to it. Now I'm going to take this final point, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to go forward a few frames, paste it. I want to overshoot this morph as well. Now I'm going to take the selection tool, click a point, and then click drag some here. And I'm just going to move these up by clicking one of them. Then I can hold shift and it will lock this in a direction. So I want to go above, I want to go up. So it overshoots above it. Now I'm going to hit F9 on these last 2 keyframes. And you can see that that morph happens kind of quicker here. We can get through this kind of bad area. We can also go through and start setting individual keyframes here so that this transition is a bit more clean. So that there's a few more right angles occurring, which kind of work with the style of this font. And I just want to get rid of these being easy ease keyframes. So I'm just control clicking those twice. Except for this last one, I do want that to be a bit easy eased. And I'm going to push these points to the right so they overshoot this way a little bit. And also down. So I'm going to click drag these. I'm just going to bring these down a little bit. And I'm just going to increase the time it can kind of settle here. And I want this to kind of lean as well. So I'm going to shift arrow those over. 5. I'm going to include this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they all kind of go at the same amount. And we move it over one keyframe so it has a little more time to do that. In addition to moving this keyframe up for these points, I'm also going to move these over. So I'm going to select off and then select back on, and then shift select all the ones that I want. Then I'm going to shift move these over just a little bit. And what else we can do is affect the transform animation that we had going on. So now what I can do is on this last kind of keyframe, I want to set the anchor point here to grab the Y shortcut or the pan behind tool here. I'm just going to click and drag this over to the corner of the letter, not necessarily the corner of the bounds. Now what will happen is I can rotate this from that point. So while it settles here, it will also rotate. So I'm going to set a keyframe on rotation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rotate it just slightly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'm going to go past 0 just a touch and then come back up to 0. Leave the first one as linear because it's already going to be moving. And then let's watch what happens. A little settle on the rotation here. Boom. Morphs. Now let's go back to looking at the big picture. These turned off, so we need to just turn these back on. You can click and drag them to enable all the visibility again. Now let's back up a little bit. Shift question mark. So the in is being animated a bit prematurely. So we can just toggle that down and then slide the keyframes for this wherever makes sense for this L. So I want it to happen on that anticipation. So let's move all of this over here. And the other thing we can do is change the fill for this so that we can differentiate between the two. So we can actually put a keyframe on the color, drag this forward, and we can just reduce the brightness here so we can differentiate between the two. So now it almost looks like a shadow and it's coming out from behind the L. Now it looks like we still need to move this over a little bit. So let's make sure we're grabbing all of the keyframes for this. You can also hit the tilde key to open that up, of course. And let's just keep moving this over until like where it's going. I'll play it in real time because that's the kind of true test. And I think we need to have it move a little sooner because the two L's are kind of fighting each other right now. So now they're a bit more in sync. I'll go in and change the color to be even darker, or even the purple color. We could color pick this so it transitions from the actual background color. So what I'm going to do is also kind of ease this first few frames. So I'm going to go to this frame and I'm just going to affect this path because it's kind of popping pretty hard. So I'm just going to go in and help these, this frame, these are just moving a bit hard. So I'm going to hit V to get the selection tool, and I want to bring these back down so they're kind of easing out of this lower position. So we keep them down a little bit longer, and the motion is maybe getting pushed by the tip over here. Help smooth that transition, since it's a bit difficult to ease all of the vertices in a complex shape in exactly the same way that you want them to occur. So I'm going to drop this down a little bit to just favor the bottom. So now when we look at this shift question mark, so now all we have to do is do the kind of transition we've done for the letters E and I as well. I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching this video so far. I hope you're getting a lot out of it. Now again, this is part of a larger course that I've created, so check it out in the link in the description, where you can also get the project files. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more.
Welcome back to this lesson. Now let's transform F into E and then I into R. So let's start with F because that's going to be the easier one. And let's do the morph after all of this stuff is done, just so we can see it in a static motion. And that way we can visualize the transformation a little bit easier. So let's go back to the Learn Outlines and let's toggle down to the E, set a keyframe on this path for the E, and copy that. Go back to the other word, the fail, and go to the F, hit a path keyframe on the F, drag that out of the way so when we paste it in, there'll be room for the E. So now let's take a look at what the transition is we've got. Zoom in on this letter, and it appears that this transition area isn't sticking the way I would expect it to, because it doesn't really need to move anywhere. So we're getting all these extra vertices coming from the first point. So let's try to see if we can match the first point up here, and right click it, mask path, set first vertex. I'm going to jump forward, select that point again, right click, and go to set first vertex. Now we have a much smoother transition, and both of these top and bottom left sides are sticking where I would expect them to be. So now all we have to do is resolve this kind of kick out here and the move up of those, and that's it. So let's zoom in here and let's just ease in and out of these. So I'm going to F9 that. And then, I mean, it's pretty good. I'm just going to do a little bit of an overshoot and then do one in between. Go back to the overshoot keyframe, and I want to see where the momentum is going. It's kind of kicking out here. So I'm going to I'm going to control click off so that I can select individual points, shift clicking these. Now I'm going to hit V and then double click them. Now I get a free transform tool. And because I kind of want this to kick up. So I'm going to have the pivot kind of back here and then rotate this up and then pull these points out, hit enter. Let's see if that doesn't kind of have a bit of a kick to it. So we have a little bit of a kick, and I think it needs to extend maybe a little more to the right, but we're running into this other letter. So we only have so much room we can go. I'm just going to drag this overshoot one out, and that looks a lot better. I mean, that's pretty much good, except for how kind of this gets a little bit messy. So I'm just going to click this one, drag it over a little bit with holding down the shift key to drag it directly to the right, and then drag this over and give these a little bit more room so they're not right on top of each other. I'm going to control click this twice to put a roving key in, Now that just kind of cleaned up that area. I'm pretty happy with this. And now all we need to do is decide, when do we want that morph to happen? Do we want it to happen during this animation here? We can have it kick into an E on top of this overshoot here, which I think would make sense. So let's click and drag these over and just time this now with that kick, that overshoot rather. I'm going to drag this back a little bit so we go up. Drag it back 1 or 2 frames. Drag this over just a little bit because it's still a little poppy. I think that works pretty good. We're not really going to see it that well doing that. So if you want to see the E transformation, then I would recommend, putting it somewhere else. But for now, let's just leave that. Let's go over to the original learn, and we need to grab the R now. So let's grab the R path. We have 2 paths here, and we need to set a keyframe on both of them. Control, copy. Now we can go back to the I layer here, toggle this down, and we need to duplicate this because we have 2 keyframes and they need to go somewhere. So we're going to set a keyframe on both of these, drag these out of the way so that when we paste, now we have somewhere for them to go. So now we just need to fix this kind of offset here that occurred from doing the other animation. So I'm just going to grab both of these paths, and then I'm going to turn back on the outlines here for this. And I'm going to double click actually, I'm not even these outlines. I'm going to turn the one that has the difference mode. We could turn this one to difference as well, but this is a little bit easier. So I'm going to double click the letter R paths, drag it up and over so I can match up these. And the goal here is to see something that's totally black. And I can turn off the paths here so I can see behind it while I'm moving this. And so now we have these keyframes, and that's what we want, and not these bad ones. So now we can deal with the transformation, the morph there. I'm just going to slide this down so it's happening after all that animation's occurring. Turn off the difference mode layer there. And now we can go in and start to deal with this morph. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Again, the first thing we want to do is to see if we can't identify where the first vertex is and move that. So I'm going to turn on the outlines and go to each one of these paths and see where the first vertex is for these keyframes. So I'm looking at the top left corner here is where it is, and there it is again. All right. So it appears that that one is going to be fine. But again, similar to the F to the E, this morph that we just did, the lower left portion is not morphing very well. So I want to grab that point and set this as the key, the first vertice rather. I'm going to hit G so I can select a single point, right click, and mask and shape path, set first vertex. And I'm making sure I'm on this keyframe here. I'm going to go back to this original keyframe. Now, what I'm a little worried about is accidentally selecting this interior one and then scrub backward, maybe here. And I just want to scale this down and just have this live inside of the other path. So I'm going to delete the first path. So now I'll just kind of hide inside of that. So now I'm also not in threat of accidentally selecting the left corner of this as a first vertex. Although it looks like we will need to adjust that as well for that one because it's flipping inside out. So let's deal with the first one here. We have, let's hit G so I can grab this, set that as the first vertex. Now that's working a little bit better. We do have a little bit of wonkiness here, but it's mainly because there's just so many points it's hiding in the crevices to make this R shape. So we're just gonna have to deal with that as best we can for this morph. And the trick to this stuff is if it's happening fast, people only see the settle. So if you can sell the settle really well, then people can, you can forgive a lot that's happening in the middle. People just won't see it, to be honest. So let's sell the settle first, and then we can deal with the transition area in between the first two keyframes. So let's see where this is. It's kind of popping here. The R, I'm just kind of seeing what's the original motion, because we're going to overshoot that in this overshoot, right? That's why it's called an overshoot. So I'm going to shift select these. Then I'm going to double click them and then bring the pivot down here. Just kind of rotate these down so it accentuates and overshoots that motion. And I'm going to offset this a little more and have these. I'm going to have that keyframe actually happen after. I'm going to kind of manually brute force this overshoot. All right. And what I mean by that is I'm just going to brute force is what it sounds like. You're just forcing things to look the way you want it to. So I want that overshoot to kind of happen, this to be the last thing that's moving on the overshoot. So I need to have that on its own keyframe. So this overshoot is going to have several keys that are just manually getting brute force. So I'm going to shift left arrow on this keyframe. And then when I come to this one, I'm just going to 1, 2, 3, 4. That way I know that it's actually settling from here to there. And if I easy ease these, that'll help kind of sell the settle into the final position. I could do a double overshoot, of course. I could, overshoot the other direction as well. So I could grab these, double click, pull this pivot down here again, and then just kind of rotate this in a little bit. So we'll kind of have this longer settle on that. The other thing we do is, of course, do the kind of transform rotation that we did on the other one. So I think I might leave this for now and then just make this transition a little bit more pretty. So in here, I want to fix all this. I'm going to hit G, and then I'm going to pull these in a way, alt-clicking to get rid of these tangents. So I'm not fighting the tangents as well, and get these kind of in line. Alt-click this up here, alt-click that one, because I just do not want to be fighting these tangents if I don't have to. So this is the example of brute forcing it. Stuff doesn't look good. Put it somewhere that hopefully makes it look a little bit better. I'm going to alt-click all of these that are very difficult to see right now. And make sure that they're in the right order. They're kind of getting put in the right place as they go down. Select these, double click, kind of give it a little bit of a rotation as well here so it settles. And then I'm going to deal with the top. So I'm kind of taking it piece by piece. I'll look at one part of the animation, I'll look at another part of the letter rather, and see that everything is kind of starting to move in the way it should, and clean up these shapes so that they're not ugly shapes in these transition areas. So now what you have to deal with is this cutout. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to take this final shape. So there's no reason why it has to start as an eye, because it's hiding in the center anyway. So I can just delete this eye. All right, I'm need to select the keyframe and hit delete. And then what we can do is on a few frames before, I'm going to hit G, double click it, and then just scale this down on Shift. And I'm just going to scale it down smaller than a pixel. That way it actually won't show up at all. So I'm zooming in really close, Control plus to zoom in, and then just Shift clicking basically into nothing. Now, if I take the mask outline off, you can see there's no outline occurring there. So now it'll come from nothing. And we could easy ease that. And of course, we need an overshoot for that. So take that one off. So it has a little more time. Easy ease this and go to that final frame. Just kind of scale it out. And hit enter. I'm going to hit G, Control click away. Now I can select this one point. Maybe shift that up a little bit. And now that can easy ease back into itself. I am going to translate the whole thing. I think it doesn't look, it shouldn't be moving. It's kind of the whole thing stopping. Doesn't make as much sense. And maybe I can rotate it a little bit. So now I pivot from that top corner on that rotation. So we have essentially morphed one word into another word. And now we just need to decide where we want the R to be animated. If we want it at the top here, which I think, if we do it the same as the E, that would be where we do it. And there you have it. Have morphed one word into another. And hopefully you did not fail and that you learned something in this little project. I encourage you to take a look at my project files if you're having any trouble. And before we go, let me just do one more thing, which will boost up this animation. I always think of this after the fact. Offsetting things is very important. The F, A, and the I move together. So what I want to do is click here, hit U, and I want to go through each one of these and offset the path. So I want the I to go first, then I want the A and then the F, because the L will kind of be making this be a domino effect. Basically, it'll be what's motivating them to move up. So I think it's only natural to delay them that direction. So the I can stay where it's at. Let's grab the A and let's grab those keyframes. So it's all of these, and let's just move these over. So as this is coming through, this is still down here. And the same thing for the F. So that there's this kind of domino effect happening instead of it all occurring at the same time. So that's one little kind of final trick. And of course, you can apply the turbulent display, so you can make this look like it's handwritten. You can do all these other types of things you've learned so far, but that is one way to do a morph transition of letters and words. So I hope you've learned something, and I will see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching. After the last few lessons that were a bit longer, let's do a shorter one now and learn how to animate text along a path. I'm going to add my background. And because this background image is larger than 1920 by 1080, I'm going to make a new composition this way and make sure my settings are how I want them. And I will hit OK. And now I'm going to click and drag the background image in, and I'm just going to scale it up a little bit to fit the composition. And I'm going to add my text by right-clicking and going to New Text. I'm just going to toggle through and find a more appropriate font. So it's font selected. I'm going to increase the font here. I'm also going to increase the tracking. So I'm just going to click and drag that just a little bit because this font, the letters are kind of right on top of each other. And I'm just going to center the text so I can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to change the color to something maybe in the scene to match the scene. And I'm just going to ramp this up a little bit so it's a little more visible. And now that I have my text, I'm going to select that layer. I'm going to hit G to pull up the pen tool. And I'm just going to click and drag along this path that I want the text to follow. So I'm starting the top left, and I'm going to go down to the right. I'm going to hold down spacebar, and I get to move that even though I haven't let go of my mouse yet. And just make a bit of a curvy line here, down, out of frame. And what I'm going to do is toggle this down and go to Text, Path Options, and then choose Mask 1. And that's the default name it's going to give to any mask that you create. And now we have our text on a path. So we can quickly animate this by using these first and last margins. I'm just going to hold down Shift to go a little bit faster. And there. And I will keyframe the first margin. I'm going to scrub forward in time a little bit, maybe 10 seconds. And I'm just going to shift click drag this out of frame. So now we have our text following our nice smooth little path. So on second thought, I might just reverse this path. So I'm going to click and drag these and go to Keyframe Assistant, Time Reverse Keyframes. And just because I want to be able to read, I think, the first word first. So that makes sense. And then after the fact, I can also, of course, change the path, and it can update in real time. So you can kind of adjust this if it's, you're not seeing the text very well because it's going across the sky. We can lower that. And now you can see the text even better. So that is how you animate text on a path. Welcome to this lesson where we will create a write-on effect for some custom text that I hand wrote in Procreate. And I exported it as a PSD file into Photoshop. So if I jump over to Photoshop, you can see that we have this file and we can bring this in with its layers inside of After Effects. So let's jump back to After Effects and let's get started. So we can import Photoshop files just like any other file by right-clicking and going to File. I can open this up. Import as doesn't matter as much because it's going to ask us again as soon as we hit import. Now for these options, I do not want footage. Footage will compress all of the Photoshop layers down into one layer. So I want to keep this as a composition and hit OK. So this will create a composition for us with the layers, but it'll also separate the layers out. So because this composition is, and these assets are larger and of a different aspect ratio than 1920 by 1080 or HD, I need to create my own composition first. So I'm going to click the new composition button, and I'm going to keep these settings. I'm going to change this to 15 seconds and hit OK. I'm just going to rename that real quick as the text animation, just so we're staying organized. So there's nothing in here right now, so I need to select one, shift select the other, and click and drag them into the composition. Now, like I said, they're too big, so I'm going to hit S to get scale and then scale them down just a little bit. I'm going to hold down Control to get a little finer control. And I'm also going to take Dream by itself and just scale that down so it's not as large in the frame. So whenever I'm given two static objects like this, it's not footage. I need to, as a creative artist and as a motion graphics artist or whatever your role may be, you need to always find ways to pump up what you're given. Always try to plus it, as they say. So whenever I'm given these static elements, I need to try to find some way to have them move or have some visual interest in them. And so let's create a little bit of movement in the background. So I'm going to make it feel like we're zooming into the frame a little bit. So with scale up and position, I'm going to hold down Shift P to also bring it position. I'm going to set a beginning keyframe at the first frame by clicking and dragging the stopwatches. I'm going to go to the last keyframe and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'm also going to bring the composition down, because if you look here, you can see that the horizon line is exactly in the dead center. So if we scrub through the zoom, the horizon line stays where it is. And like I said, with static elements, I also need to think about what else is being static. Even though I'm scaling in, the horizon line is static. So let me move that. Let me animate that a little bit. So now if I bring the image down a little bit, now we're also getting some vertical movement. So I'm thinking in all dimensions, scaling in vertically, horizontally, what's going on, color, speed, all these kinds of different elements in motion graphics. You always want to kind of start to play with them and question what's happening with that, what's happening vertically, what's happening horizontally. These are the type of questions you need to ask yourself, and why in this next series of lessons, we're going to kind of take this as like a little project that we've been given. So and we're going to learn much broader concepts than we have already that go a little beyond text, but it'll be fun. So let's create something more interesting for the background, for the write-on effect to kind of play with and be a part of this idea of dream and this kind of ethereal feeling. So what I came up with after experimenting a little bit was just having some graphic elements kind of come at the screen like we have with the image, which will also do a little bit of warping later on, and to help kind of sell that like we're going into this frame. So to sell that even more, I came up with the idea of having a rectangle. So I click the rectangle tool and I want to shift click and just make a little rectangle here. Now it's not centered, and I can easily do that by going to the align window over here and go align horizontal and align vertical. Now, if you notice, the pivot still isn't in the center. So the easiest way to get that in the center is to hold down Control Alt and hit Home. That's also on the cheat sheet that you can download in the project files. So now that we have this in the center, I know if I ever want to rotate it, it'll be rotating from the center and it will work very well. But what I want to do is just to scale this up, kind of similar to the background. So I'm going to hit S to bring up scale. So with scale up, if I click and drag scale, you can see the line weight of this shape is also affected by scaling up this layer. Now, there's a workaround to this. If we toggle this layer down a little bit more and we go to the contents and we go to the rectangle, there's even more options here. So we could go to the rectangle path, and now we have size. So if I click and drag this value, you can see the line weight does not change. So as it scales small, the line weight is staying the same. So I want to use this to animate the scale. So I'm going to bring this down really small and basically until it disappears, which is 0. And I'll hit a keyframe on size. And I want this to finish before the end because I want to have time for the effect we're going to apply to it. And I want to have time for the dream text to start animating after this is kind of finishing. This kind of motion graphics effect is finishing. So I want to zoom this up. And I think it's a little bit boring to have these vertical lines in the frame. So what I'm going to do is toggle down the contents here so I can get back to the transforms of the whole layer. And I'm just going to rotate this maybe 45 degrees. So this gives some different lines of direction because everything in the frame is very horizontal. So I don't want to just go perpendicular to that. I want to create some more interest. So now that's rotated. That looks more interesting to me. And I'm trying to take you through the steps of the evolution of how I'm thinking and creating something instead of just doing it without explaining. That always kind of annoyed me is, yeah, but like what was the decision you made that got you there? And that's what I'm trying to share. That's always annoyed me when I'm watching someone else or I'm learning. I'm like, yeah, but why did you make that decision? So that's why I'm doing a lot of talking and and trying to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, and the things I'm thinking of, because these are the things, when you're learning this stuff, you need to learn the thought process, not just the tools, because that's really what's going to get you far and further in your career or in your projects. So now we have this kind of simple zoom. Let's keep adding it. Let's keep adding to it and making it more complicated. It's like, all right, I got that. That kind of looks cooler. Every step, we're making it better and better. Let's keep asking the question, how can I make this even better? And you do something, you're like, all right, that is better. And then you just ask that question again, keep playing, keep experimenting. And so how can we make this better? Let's ease it. So I click and select all the keyframes, hit F9. Now it's easy ease. So the animation feels a little better. Now I notice, it's popping on because the line width isn't being affected by the scale. So let's actually change the line width. Let's animate it over time so it doesn't just pop on in the first few frames because that can be a little distracting. So let's go to the stroke and we'll go to the stroke width and we'll hit a keyframe here. Now, I don't like to look at all this stuff that I'm not going to be using. So first off, we're not going to use fill because we're not filling this. So I can just delete that. The next thing is I want to select the layer and hit U. So, because I only want to look at what I'm actually animating now. So let's get to a point where we like the line width. We want it to be at this kind of endpoint. So I'll keyframe that maybe midway through its scale up. And I'll go back to the beginning and I just want to bring this way down, maybe to like 5 or something. So that it doesn't feel like it's popping on as much. Now, it's difficult to see because the pivot is in the center and it's scaling from very small. So a way to hide that is Control-Shift-H. And now we can see how that's beginning without having the pivot point be in our way. So I like where that's going. That feels cool. And we still have the movement of the background going. So these things layered on top of each other are beginning to be interesting. Now, the other way to make this even more interesting is to have some knowledge of some of the effects here. So I'm just going to click and drag this below the text because we're going to want that on the top. So let's experiment with some effects. We haven't done any effects yet. So let's right click and we can start to explore some of the time elements. And what I want to do is use echo. And I know this just because I've gone through all of these. I've kind of played with all of them. And I'm like, you know what? Echo is pretty cool. And I think that we can actually fake maybe some dimensionality to this, kind of one-dimensional animation. It's just this rectangle is just scaling up. So what echo does is you can basically set a number of echoes. It kind of makes sense why it's called echo. But if we increase this a little bit, we can see, let's maybe do like 6. And let's affect the time. You can see that it's basically taking a moment in time before the animation where it actually is, and it's repeating it. So that's kind of cool. We get a lot of more animation and visual interest kind of for free. Now, I want the end to be the color. I don't want it to be white. And it's white because the echo operator is set to add, and that is a kind of a color mode. If we look down here in the shape layers, let me just turn off the effects right now so we can see the original. There are blend modes here. And so you can see add is right here as well. So if we add that, you can see on certain colors, it will turn white. And we don't want that in the echo, because when you add the same color to itself a lot, it's going to turn white. So you can experiment with these just because there's more options than this effect. That's just kind of like one little attribute of that effect. But blend modes are very important to understand kind of the general idea of what's going on. So for this general effect, I want to use soft light because I want to be able to see the image behind it. I don't want this rectangle to be too overbearing. Now, if I turn the echo effect back on, you can see it's still white. So we need to change this echo operator so it's not adding the echoes on top of itself. So I'm just going to change it to maximum. And now we get back to our original looking soft light blend mode. So now we have a cooler blend mode, or to me, it seems cooler. And I want a little more distance between each one of these. So I'm going to kind of increase the amount of time between each repetition. And I also want to not be able to see the beginning as well as I can see the end. So I'm going to decay the elements. So you can see the first ones are still kind of as bright as they were, but the ones in the center are starting to lose their brightness. So it feels to me a bit more three-dimensionality. So now when it zooms in, it feels like we're kind of going into something a little bit. And I like that, especially with the background zooming in. Imagine where we just started and just kind of playing around and keep asking questions. How can I make this a little bit better? What would make this more interesting? And to me, I feel like we're in a decent point where we could, maybe try a couple things, maybe go back and just use this. I like this as a kind of starting point. One thing I want to try is let's duplicate this and let's rotate this by another 45 degrees, so 90. So let's include a square. So those two shapes combined might be kind of interesting. Now I'm hitting spacebar, of course, to RAM preview this. You can see it'll stop and only play back for as much as it's previewed here in real time. I think that's kind of interesting, but I also want it to be offset. I don't like how they're locked to each other. So what if we figured out how to make them offset? So it could be as simple as just clicking this layer and dragging it back so it starts a little bit later than the diagonal square. So I'm just going to pop it back maybe a little more. Let's see how that affects it. So we get I like that a lot better because I want the diagonal, the kind of diamond shape to be the prominent one. And instead of these vertical lines ending here, let's actually have it go all the way off of frame because they're kind of competing to me and a little too much. So yeah, remember we didn't use scale on this one, I hit S. So anytime you're like, oh, where did I put that keyframe? Hit U and it'll pull up all the keyframes. So I'm going to hit J to jump back to that keyframe. And for size, I want to go past the bounds and just barely past it because I want these to kind of slow in just off of frame. So I want to go just off of frame with that end position of that one because I don't want to see that. I just want the diagonals to be left behind. And it's slowing down because it's RAM previewing. And you'll notice that we still have motion even after our keyframes have finished. And that's, of course, because of the echo. That effect is still finishing because it's echoing something that was happening, almost a half a second before. So, and it's doing that, repeating it 6 times. So it's going to take much longer after the keyframe for this effect to finish. So I like where this background is at. We're going to punch up the whole effect at the end a little bit with an adjustment layer, and I'll explain what that is and show you what an adjustment layer is. I might make a few more tweaks actually now that I'm like trying to end the lesson. I want a little bit more. I didn't like the distance between when I'm looking at this. Let me just undo this so you can see what I'm talking about. I didn't like this distance. This needs to be longer because if you look at the distance from here to the edge of the frame, that's a really long distance. And this is very short. So I don't know. I just want it to be more. It seemed like an odd, wrong one. It seemed like an odd, right keyframe, but hitting J. it seemed like an odd distance between those points. So I just want to bring this off. So it's a bit more framing the whole thing evenly than being asymmetrical. Cool. So we learned a lot in this lesson. None of it was about text very much, but learning these types of things will help support the text animation that you do and inform it and help put a nice little bow around it sometimes when you have a background to animate or things around it. So I wanted to get that background in there and also kind of share how I think about approaching a project or some animation like this. Thanks for watching. In the next lesson, we are going to get started on animating the write-on effect for the text. Welcome back, and let's begin with the write-on effect. Now, there's two ways to do it that I know of or that I like to use, and I want to show you the one that I don't prefer as much now, and then right after that, I'll show you the way that we're going to do it and the way I prefer. The reason I'm showing you both ways is because, again, I want you to understand the way I'm thinking about things and the why behind my decisions, because I think you'll learn a lot more if you understand the thought process as much as what button to click, because that'll only get you so far. You need to understand how to make decisions and why, why I'm making the decisions I'm making. I mean, why else are you taking the class? That's my opinion. I know some instructors don't share this kind of stuff, but I do. Anyway, so there's an effect called write-on. So you'd think, let me just type it in here, find the write-on effect, because honestly, I don't know where a lot of these effects are. I just know what they're called now that I've used them enough. So I'm going to click and drag it. You can either drop it on here, or I know I have this layer selected, so I'm going to drop it in the effect window. So the way this effect works is basically you animate a position of a brush over time, and that is going to reveal the letter. Now we're going to do this just for the first letter, and then I'm going to show you why I don't like it. So very quickly, we're going to leave the settings as they are, but I want to set a keyframe at the beginning on the brush position. And with this selected, I also want to remember, earlier in the last lesson, I had hid all of the helper kind of outlines. And so to unhide those, I need to hit Control-Shift-H. Now I get those back. So with this effect selected, I can see the brush position is here. So I'm just clicking it and dragging it. I'm going to zoom into the letter D is what we're going to work with first. And it's not super obvious what's going on until we start keyframing it, because there's no brush strokes yet. I don't really understand what's going on. So let's just get started and you'll figure it out. So we have set a keyframe on the brush position. So I'm just going to hit U on the layer here so we can see where we're setting keyframes in the layer. And I'm also going to turn off these shape layers so they're not distracting us as we're working. And so I'm going to move forward in time, maybe 1 second. And you may have noticed we've lost the little cursor, the brush stroke thing that we were moving. Well, that's because even though we have the layer selected, we don't have the effect selected. So once we select the effect, then that comes back. So if you ever get worried and you think you've lost something, then just take a step back and think about what you have selected, that kind of stuff. So clicking and dragging this, you can see these kind of dotted lines forming. And of course, if I go outside of the bounds of this layer, it disappears because it's only affecting this layer. But now you kind of get the idea of what it's doing. The only problem is that brush stroke is so tiny, we can't really see it. So I want to increase the brush size. So I'm going to click and drag that. And I still can't see it because guess what? The color's white. I'm doing it on white. So let's select a different color, something like red. And now we can see what's going on. So between these two keyframes, we can see it's just kind of animating this linear path between these keyframes. And I'm going to hit J and K to jump between them. And so basically what you're going to do is draw through time these little moments. So I'm just going to click and drag keyframes around. And the first problem I encounter and why I don't like this tool is because I'm going to have to go through time and draw this curve with linear lines. And that means a lot of keyframes. So the other thing with this is if I want the timing of this curve to be smooth and even, I need to make the distance between these keyframes the same number of frames. So now I also got to start keeping track of, all right, how many keyframes is it? How many frames are between these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's probably enough. So I'll move this here. Got to start counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So not only just the distance between these keyframes, but the distance between these lines, because if I want this to be the same speed throughout, it needs to be the same distance and the same time. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically just keep doing this. For sake of speed, I'm not going to be as precious with this because we're not going to use this anyways, but I want to just show you how this tool works. And, you know, doing the write on effect, you're going to think, well, we're going to use the write on effect, the actual effect of that name. But let me show you just the limitations of it, I guess, is the best way to say it, most polite way to say it. So let's just get this. You can see how it's a little bit tedious, and how, you know, the other thing is like, hey, we're not covering this whole thing up. And we can do that with a bigger brush stroke. The reason why I like to keep the brush stroke thinner is so I can see where I'm going and where I've been. And then we can just increase this after the fact and then make tweaks. So we're almost done. And so now I can go to the brush size and crank that up until I don't see any more white. Now, you know, one problem with this is, well, we'll find out what some more problems are. But, you know, the first one is we're overlapping. We want the line to start just where the base of this stroke starts. We don't want it to overlap with something else if we can help that. So let's start it exactly there. So that way, when we switch over to, instead of paint style on original image, let's do reveal original image. So now we can see it's made everything disappear, and it's going to only show what's being revealed by the brush stroke. So if I just play this back, you can see it's going to be a little inconsistent. Well, that's not that bad. I was going to say it's going to be a little inconsistent, but me just going quickly with it actually worked okay. Now, you know, a couple of things we can see are going to be issues are this little T area. We don't want it to look like a T. We want it to be a solid stroke until we get around to this loop. So we can make a mask around that, and we'll have to animate it. So let's get to the point in time where we're going to need to start animating it. So maybe here. What I want to do is I'm going to make a mask with this layer selected. I need to go to the pen tool or hit G and simply just draw out a mask. So now it's made everything else disappear. So I want to bring up that mask by hitting M and change this to subtract. Now you can see there's still a little bit, so we could keep tweaking this or change the feather amount here. If I toggle the feather amount down, we could change the feather amount by a tiny amount and get that exactly perfect. But when you're looking at something at 400%, you can see right here, you know, you can lose sight of the big picture. You're not going to see that kind of 1 pixel fade out there. So I tend not to worry about that too much, especially when something's happening in motion, and this will only be on screen for a few seconds. And so you want to think about how efficient you're being and where you're spending your time. I don't want to spend my time messing with something no one's ever going to see. So let me hit a keyframe on this mask path, and let me make another one for this. I don't want to affect the kind of roundness of that brush stroke. So I'm going to make the mask kind of curve. So up until that frame, it will respect that curve. So I held down Shift, by the way, to get a straight line up, and then I can just connect that. And let's go to subtract as well. So let's toggle this down and set a keyframe on this as well. And now I'm just going to hit U here so I can kind of condense the view of where all my keyframes are. So I'm going to go forward 1 frame with Control Arrow, and I want to get rid of this mask altogether. So I'm just going to double click it, and I'm going to drag it out of the way of everything. Now I'm going to go forward 1 more frame, and I'm going to go because we're working in one frame increments, it's hard to see in the timeline. So I'm going to hit plus on my keyboard to zoom in on the timeline. And I want this keyframe to be right before we're going to move it. So I move that keyframe forward. So now that change will happen over one frame. The problem here is this time doesn't really catch up as much. So you have to think about that as well. So let's think if it is moving at this kind of speed, we might need to delay when this moves. Maybe one more frame. The other thing you need to take into account when you're doing this is before you start doing these masks is, hey, is this the timing I want? Because it's going to be affected by basically the timing of when the masks are animated off. So for example, let's say this is way too slow. This D is moving too slow. And this, even though we're not going to use this write-on effect, all of these things I'm saying applies to the one we are going to use. So let's say this is too slow. I want to click and drag this and then hold Alt and scale all these keys down. So it'll speed up this animation and go much faster. Now, the problem is we spent time animating those masks and now they don't work with the timing that we changed. So that's why there is an order of operations to some of these things. Otherwise, you're going to be giving yourself double the amount of work. So you don't want to do that. So you got to think about, all right, what am I going to do? How am I doing it? And make the decisions you need to make before you move on to the next step. So that is the write-on effect. I think you can maybe understand why I don't like it right now. The mask thing is we're going to have to deal with that and do that on the other one as well. So that's not really the reason. It's basically we get all these freaking keyframes. look at all of these, and then we have to like figure out the distance and the time and make sure that's consistent if we want a smooth motion, and we can't do curves. So it's just it's just too much for me. I'm not a fan. So let's go to the way we are going to do it. And that's with a shape layer. So I'm going to click the pen tool again with no layer selected. And with no layer selected, it'll automatically create a shape layer for me. So I'm going to go through this process, but with a pen tool. So I'm going to click and drag the first one so that it will be a bit of an arc. I'm going to hold down Shift so it's a straight line. And I'm going to make a bit of an arc here. I'm going to make a bit of an arc here to really try to follow the path. So you can already see how much quicker this is than the write-on effect. So, and that's mainly because we have these handles that we can create curved shapes. And we're not having to use a linear tool to go around a curve. It just doesn't make sense. And especially with handwriting, you're going to run into that quite a bit with the write-on effect. So you might as well use one that accommodates that a little bit better. So now we have that. Let's also get this sorted out so that we have a curved shape, because again, we're going to animate this on and we don't want these, what they call butt caps. We don't want a butt cap and we want a rounded cap. So if I toggle down the shape layer, let me just hit the enter to type in write on. So we know which layer we're doing. We could rename these, but we're only going to have this one shape layer, so it's not going to get too complicated in this composition. So now that we toggle this down, we want to get rid of this butt cap, and also want to delete the fill because we're not going to be using it. So with the stroke toggled down, we get this little drop-down menu for the line cap. So we can say, instead of a butt cap, we want a round cap. And now you can see we get these rounded caps. So I'm just going to drag this up to the edge of that stroke. I want to do the same thing for the end position as well. So the next step in the process is to animate this thing. And we're going to do this for each letter. So let's stay organized. And instead of shape 1, let's call this D. So I'm hitting enter again to rename it. And with that selected, I want to go to add and go to trim paths. And you're going to use this one a lot. It's the most common effect I use on strokes and shape layers. So with that added, we can toggle it down and see we have a start and end position. Let me just zoom out real quick. And basically what we're going to do is animate the start and end position. Well, it's fully on right now, so we know we don't want it to be ending with 100%. So let's bring that back down and set a keyframe. And then let's go forward maybe 1 second and then go to 100%. So already, again, you can see how much quicker this is and how fewer keyframes we have than the other method. We have 2 keyframes to deal with instead of 30 or whatever we did on the other one. So let's do a little bit of easy ease on this, F9. Let's see how that animates on. It's a little quick. And you also have to think about when you're doing handwriting, the speed and when things slow down. So if you're going to turn a 90-degree corner right here at the top of the D, you're going to have your pen slow down when you do that. So we don't want it to be at its fastest point. If we look at the graph editor, we just click this button with these selected, it's going to show us, it's moving at a pretty quick rate right here. And we can actually slow that down by just setting another keyframe by scrubbing to where it is in the time. And let's create another keyframe here and go back to the graph editor. Now, nothing's changed in this slope, the rate of motion here. Let me just zoom in by hitting plus on my keyboard, scrubbing over and kind of recentering these. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Now, this is, time over value change. So time is, of course, across the bottom. As we scrub through time, we see a value change. And if we want it to slow down, what do you think we need to do? We need to flatten this out. You want this to go flat, but you see if I just click and drag this, it breaks the tangent. So what I need to do, undo that first, and then hold Alt. And you can see the tool change when you hover over the tangent. And I can also drag it in so it's not as long. So now flat would be no motion. There's no value change over time. We don't want it to be completely flat. We just want it to slow down. So let's go a little bit off of horizontal. So now when we play this back, it should slow down just a little bit. All right, it's not slowing down a lot. So let's drag this tangent handle back out. So over a longer period of time, it will change value over a slower rate. So let me just do that here as well. Drag the tangent handle out so that this curve is flatter for longer. So it's a little hard to see at 1 second, but it is there. And if we wanted to make this a little more exaggerated, we could do what we did earlier. Select all these, hold down Alt, and drag this out and make it longer. And you can see that's a little bit clearer. Let me just flatten this out completely, and it'll be very obvious. So if I bring this down, now you can really see it, right? So that makes sense for writing. When you think about what are we doing here, we're not just moving buttons and clicking buttons around. You have to think about the why and how this actually would work. And it will give more authenticity to your animations, to your motion graphics, to everything that you're doing if you deliberately think about these things a little bit. So I think I want to slow down the beginning and end a little bit. So I'm going to click these and drag these handles out. While I'm holding Shift, we'll keep the tangents flat because I don't want to change those. I want those to come in nice and smooth. So let's see that. That makes sense to me. I might speed up the whole thing just a little bit. So I'm going to hold down Alt and drag all these keyframes down just a little bit, maybe 1.5 seconds. Yeah, that feels right to me. So in the next lesson, we're going to continue on with this method and finish out the whole word and actually achieve the write-on effect, and then finish out the whole animation so that the entire thing kind of comes together. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome back. Let's continue with the write-on effect. So we've done the letter D, and I want to call something out. When we made the trim paths for this letter, notice where the trim paths is in this kind of hierarchy. It's under the D letter. So you could have it outside of this. So if I hit contents and I go to add the trim paths, look where this lives outside of the letter D. So that could be affecting every layer in the contents. So if I were to make more letters, which we're going to do, and I animated this one trim paths, it would affect every letter the same. But that's not what we want. We want to affect and have the write-on effect like your handwriting. So you do one letter at a time, you'd have to have 5 hands for this word to write them all at once. So we want them to go one at a time. So if your trim paths is outside of this letter D, you can just simply click and drag it in there. And then it will only affect that letter. So I'm going to delete that because we already have our trim paths 1 right here. So with this layer selected, I'm going to create the letter R, and then I'm going to speed up the lesson so you can create E, A, and M. But there's a few other points I wanted to cover before we continue on with speeding it up. And then I'll come back after that and finish out the lesson with how to actually achieve the effect. So you could create a layer for each letter, but it would make it harder later on. And I'll show you why later on, but just understand it's not just an organizational thing, but it's also a practical thing of why we're going to keep all the shapes in this layer instead of doing, a bunch of these, and this gets a little crowded. So with this layer selected, if I have the pen tool, it'll just add a new shape to the contents. So when I click here, watch here, it'll add it. All right, now you can see shape 1 is added down there. And another thing I want to say is I'm starting with the pin up here because I want to follow the path of the natural writing motion. Again, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why did I put it up here and not down here? It's because just by looking at this, I can tell that the person started here, they went down and then back up. And that's what I want my drawing to do, my writing to do. I want it to look authentic to the style of the handwriting that I am animating. So that's why I'm doing that. So I'm going to click down here, just a very small curve one. I'm going to go back up. It is a little hard to see, so I could lower this down while I'm doing it and then just continue on. I'm just going to do, well, if I continue on, it will start to create a new shape. So if you do something like that, you want to select the last point you are at, and then you can continue with your shape. So that's one important thing to remember. So let's get rid of this butt cap again. Let's delete the fill because we don't need it. Go to the stroke, set a butt cap. We have a round cap. Let's increase the stroke so it covers everything. Let's move this down. And I might just have to increase the width of this just a little bit more. And after doing that, I want to make sure that I'm not overdoing these rounded caps because I want the ease in and ease out to happen exactly at the edge of the ink of the letter. So I want this to match that. Everywhere else on the letter, it can be, much bigger, obviously, than the letter itself. But what I want it to do is to go exactly where the end is. Now, notice when I hover my pen tool over this, you get a little circle here next to the cursor. So that means you're about to close the loop. I don't want to do that. I just want to move this point because it's the end point and I had the beginning selected. It thinks I'm trying to close this loop here and I'm not. So I'm going to change to the selection tool. And now you can see that circle went away. And now I can move this. So I'm going to do this to the bottom as well. Looks like that's pretty good. I can see a little white here. So I'm going to move this down. And I'm just going to increase this a little bit more. All right, so with that, we can add a new trim paths just to this shape. And I'm going to rename it R. And you can also order them. So I'm going to click and drag it down below, just if you're OCD like me and you want it to be a little more organized. So with this selected, I'm going to go to add trim paths. And I'm going to toggle that down. I'm going to click the end frame and drag that to 0. Now, I want it to occur after the D letter is finished. So that D letter needs to finish, and there needs to be, a few frames if you're thinking the person has to pick up their pen and move it here. So that's at least 2 frames. 1, 2. Let's give it 3 just for safety to make it feel like natural handwriting. So I'm just clicking and dragging this kind of start keyframe there. Let's go forward in time a little bit. Let's just finish this out. So we may need to do a little masking like we did if we want this to look correct as far as, there's double strokes here where you can see this one comes down, meets that one that came up from the bottom. So if you want, you could go through and create strokes on this. I'm going to show you how to do it on the letter D after we're done with this one. So let's just finish this up because I think this isn't, too bad of an example. It's not as clear as the D is. So let's create the actual effect and then we can finish the other letters. But those are the couple little points I wanted to cover before moving on. So to create the actual effect of this revealing the text, there's two different ways to do it. And in our case, there's only one way. And when I say our case, I mean with the assets we have. So let me show you the two ways. The first way that's not going to work, again, it could work in some circumstances, but because we don't have compositions that match each other, so like the shape layer is to this composition settings and the dream word, you can see the bounds of it here are much smaller and it's scaled down. So there's these discrepancies between these two. I've typed in set mat and I can click and drag it onto the text layer. And what that basically does is say, hey, use this other layer as a mat. And what a mat is just saying, block that thing out. That's a mat. So we want to use the right on layer. And when you do that, you can see it might not be appearing the way you would think it would. What is all this mess here? Well, let's turn on composite mat and you can see what's going on. There's a big difference between these two layers. You can see at first it's stretching to mat to fit. So if we turn that off, that's a little bit better. But there's this inconsistency between the scale. So if you have compositions that are exactly the same, then this would work just fine. And it's actually kind of nice because then you can have this layer down here and it doesn't matter. You can have it anywhere. But the method we're going to use, you have to have the layer above it. So let's just get rid of this set mat and just know that for future use, that might come up into play and be very useful for you. But for this project, we're going to use the track mats. So same kind of language. This is a mat. There's also mats over here. So it's the same kind of thing. It's just different ways to do it. So you can see it all. It says track mat right here. And if we click this, there's a couple different options. There's alpha, which we have, because for the right on layer, the only thing visible is what we've drawn. Everything else has an alpha, meaning you can see through it. So we can use the alpha mat or the alpha mat inverted, the opposite of that. So if we did black and white, we could use luma, which means luminance, the light, what's light and what's dark. So those are basically, even though there's 4 options, there's basically 2. You have alpha, alpha, luma, luma. One's the opposite of each other. And then this one is black and white. And this is if you have alpha, if something is non-existent or existing. Hope that makes sense. It will when we choose alpha mat. So boom, we did it. So we chose alpha mat. And now we have the same effect with way less keyframes. It took less time and we didn't have to worry about, the speed and the distance between keyframes and all that kind of stuff. So you can tell we still have that same problem where we have this T happening before it should be appearing. So we do have to do that same kind of operation that we did before to solve those kinds of problems. And that's what I was describing about the R. When R goes down, you shouldn't really see that nub right here. This line should continue straight through because on this stroke, it just goes down. This part comes on the stroke back up that goes through to make the end of the R. So it's that kind of attention to detail that will take your animation to the next level when you get very deliberate and particular about what you're doing, what's going on. Let's make those masks because also for the shape layers, it's kind of particular about where you do them. So again, the first question we want to answer is the timing right? So for D, I like this timing. If we have to make changes later, we're going to have to change the timing of the mask animation. So you can actually create the masks now on either the shape layer or the actual text layer. In this example, I want to go through doing it on the shape layer just because there's an added little gotcha catch moment that might trip some people up that I want to go over, and because it'll keep all the animation on one layer. So if we need to retime anything, we won't have keyframes on separate layers that we're having to remember, oh, I keyframe the shape layer and I keyframe this other layer. So if I want to change timing on anything, I go through 2 layers. So I like to that's the why behind the decision of why I'm doing this, why I'm making that decision. So let's go through here and do the same thing we did before, make a quick little mask. The problem is we're making another shape. See how I just started clicking? We have another mask here. If I turn this layer on, you can see I made another shape, that is. So if I want to make a mask, let me just undo this. What I need to do, this is the gotcha moment. You got to click this little button up here. So tool creates mask or tool creates shape. When you're on a shape layer, you have to let it know, what am I doing? Am I making another shape or am I making a mask of this layer? So this is the little area, little button, and that's specific to shapes. If I click on something else, that'll go away. See how it's grayed out? So this is just for shape layers. So you have to remember which one you're doing. So I'm going to click the mask one. So now when I start clicking, it's going to be a mask. And if I hit M on this layer, you can see, indeed, we have one mask. I want to go to subtract. And I want to go to where in time this actually matters. And set a keyframe on the path. Go forward 1 frame. And I'm going to move the path away. So I'm going to go to the selection tool by hitting V, double click this, and just move it out of the way, anywhere that this effect doesn't happen. So we have that side. Now let's do the other side. Again, hit G, make sure this is on. So G is the pen tool. This is making sure the mask is on. So we can just make this very quickly. And hit the mask path here. Go forward 1 frame, get rid of it. Hit V to get the selection tool, double click it, move it over here. Now, I have that annoying looking key that shouldn't have been there. It begins to animate on. Well, we still do because I didn't change this to subtract. Now, if we go to subtract, that'll be gone. Great. So now what we need to do is to do this for each of the letters. So I'm going to just turn off this track map for now so that we can actually see the letters, turn this layer back on, and go through the same process that we did for the contents here, DR. Let's go through EAM. And the way I'm seeing it is it starts here, goes that way, so it ends here. This one starts here, goes this way, comes up and then down. And this one starts here and finishes at the end. So I'm going to speed this up. You go through it and do it yourself as well. And then we'll meet back afterward to finish up this lesson. All right, so we're back and we have finished this together. So let's turn the track mat back on. So we'll go to the text layer, go to the track mat column for that, go to alpha mat, and let's just scrub back through. I'm going to hit Shift question mark to frame the whole composition, space bar to back all the way out. And now what I'm going to do between this lesson and the next lesson is to clean up these little areas, like this little jagged part here. You know, the stroke of the pen should just be this curve. So I'm going to go through the same way that we did with the masks over here. With this, I'm just going to go through and do that for each one of the letters, and I encourage you to do the same so it's nice and clean. Now, again, I want to emphasize that before you do that, you make sure that the timing is how you want it. So let's just play through it a couple times and make sure it's the right timing. That feels pretty good to me. Let's look at the total thing with the rectangles on, because what we're going to need to do next is to actually move all the animation. And again, that's one of the advantages of putting all the animation on one layer, is that we can move them all together. So I don't want this to begin animating on until after there's a little white space in the center here. So it kind of frames the word. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to hit U. I'm going to click and drag everything and just move it down. So I don't really want it to start until, you know, somewhere in here. I want it to overlap a little bit, but yeah, I think it needs to overlap a little more. So it's not totally empty for very long by the time. Yeah, that feels about right. And again, you could move all these together, but when I say make sure the timing is done, it's not this global movement of everything. It's the timing of each letter. So it's these keyframes. So if you wanted this letter to be faster, now it means you created a gap between these two keyframes. Now you need to move everything over the same amount. So if you move one keyframe, you probably need to grab everything and then slide it down, and do the same thing here if you're trying to speed up each letter or slow them down. So you want to do that before you get into the masks, doing the masks that we've already learned about twice already. So I'm not going to go over that again. But yeah, that's, you know, these guys down here, and you saw how we did that on the letter D. So just go through that and clean up each one of the letters, and I will see you in the next lesson where we will finish out this project. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to the final lesson on this project of the course. After this, we'll move on to other projects, but this will be the last one. We're working on the write-on effect. And for this, I just wanted to show you what I came up with for finishing out doing the masks on the lettering. So everything hopefully looks a little bit cleaner. And now what I want to apply is a bit of a hand-drawn effect to it. So I want a little bit of noise and wiggling to the edges of the lines. And we're going to use an effect I like a lot called roughen edges. We're going to customize it. So I'm going to add it to the text tool here, because our write-on will actually cover bigger than the edges of this, so we don't need to worry about this one anymore. What we can actually do as well before we move on is to parent the write-on effect to this layer. So let's parent this write-on effect, the write-on mat, to the text. And the reason why I'm doing that is because if I move this around, I want the mat to follow it. If I don't move it around, we're going to mess up all the work we did. So we want to go ahead and parent it just for safety's sake. If later on we want to scale this up or move it or do whatever, animate it, the transformation of it, we want the mat to follow it. So now it's parented, it's going to follow. So let's get to the roughen edges effect. So you can kind of already tell what it's doing if you look at the edges that are not as clean as they were before. So I can turn this on and off, and you can kind of see how distorted that gets. Now, there's a lot of different options here, and they're pretty self-explanatory, so I won't, beat that to death on that. But the main thing we're worried about is we want it to animate. So if I scrub to the timeline right here, it's not wiggling. It's just roughing the edges up and they're not moving. So I want to create animation on the evolution here. So if I scrub through this, you can kind of see the edges wiggling a little bit. And so I need to figure out how to keyframe that. I don't want to just set a keyframe here at the beginning and a keyframe at the end. Let's do something a little more sophisticated and learn a few more tricks. So if I toggle the layer down and go into the effects, you can see I can get to the rough and edges stopwatch here. Now, if I hold Alt and I click this, I can write an expression here. You can see the values turn red because they're going to be driven by the expression we're about to write. And the expression is going to be time times, let's just say, I don't know, 1,000. And I need to click, don't hit enter. It'll just go down and make a paragraph. Click anywhere outside. So now we have this expression driving it, and you can see it's red here as well. So when we scrub through the timeline, it's actually doing the animation for us. Now, if we want to take this to an even more sophisticated level and basically make our own kind of rig for this, let's go and create a slider control. So I'll go slider control, and this is basically an empty thing that does nothing. It's just a control that we've created that currently does nothing. But what we can do is we go back to this expression, because instead of having to, let's say we start animating, and we're like, you know what? I want to change the speed. This is kind of slow. I want it to wiggle a little faster. Every time we want to do that, we'll have to go down here, click here, change this number, type in a number. It's slow. I don't like it. So what we can do is delete the number and use the pick whip to go to this slider value. So now when we deselect it, we can close all this down and not have to go back there again to affect this. So currently it's set at 0. So if we wanted to go back to what we were at, we need to go to 100. Sorry, it was at 1,000. And now we're back to where we started. But let's say I want to speed it up. All I have to do is drag this. Now it will go faster. And that's how quick and easy that is. And we made our own rig. Very little expression language. We just said time. Basically, it's taking this number and then multiplying it by whatever value this is. And that's what evolution it'll set at. So that'll just kind of give it a random number to generate some movement here and make it look a little more hand-drawn. Now, one of the other attributes that I kind of like, especially for this effect of Dream, is increasing the border. Watch what happens when I increase the border. It almost kind of makes it turn into a cloud. So let's use this to actually animate it off, because we have an animation on, the write-on effect. But how does this animate off? Let's actually animate the border as well. And you can kind of discover happy accidents like this by applying effects, experimenting. I really want to encourage that. There's no right or wrong way to do a lot of things. There's just different ways to do it. And you can use tools and ways and effects in ways that they're not intended for. That's really the heart of After Effects, is, getting creative with the tools that you have and using them in unexpected ways to your advantage. So let's go to the end here where the animation will kind of be done. And let's keyframe the border at 8. And let's go forward. Let's give it maybe like a half a second to kind of finish out. And let's animate it all the way up to something like that. And this is where we can kind of see the write-on shape layer is affecting it. So we might want to copy paste it after we're done, because we can see these hard edges on something that should be fairly soft. So we can actually copy paste this effect on after the fact if we wanted to. So I'm going to hit U with this layer up so I can easy ease this first one. I think I just want to have it a slow start. And I'm going to drag this out maybe closer to the end. All right, so instead of it totally fading off, it looks like there's also maybe like a little glitch here in After Effects where it's stopping the evolution before it should. So if we just move the evolution a little bit, maybe we can get it to keep going. Yeah, it's a little weird bug you'll run into random stuff like this every once in a while, but let's also fade out the opacity. So I'll hit T on this layer, hit a keyframe at 100, and I'll go forward. Let me hit U so I can see where this is timed out. I want it to kind of run in line with the border being increased. So I'll just bring this down to 0. I'll hit F9 to ease the beginning. And then the other thing I want to do is have this kind of float up a little bit. So I'll hit P, bring it position, hit a keyframe, and then bring this straight up. So I'll just drag that keyframe out so that it extends the whole length, and then of course set an easy ease here. I might go to keyframe velocity and make that even more. And I want to make that even slower. So I'm actually going to go back to keyframe velocity and make this something like 80. Yeah, that feels a lot better. Now, the other thing we could do to have a more global effect to this is go to Distort, Turbulent Displace. And that'll work on the whole thing. Now, one problem you can already tell is the fact that the mat isn't getting turbulent displaced as well. So we're missing chunks of it here. So there's two different things we could do. We could apply the same effect on both layers, or we could pre-compose this and then apply it to the pre-composition. So let's delete that. We'll move everything into a pre-composition by selecting them, going to right-click, pre-compose. I will call this Cream Fade. Okay. And now if we add Turbulent Displace, the mat and the text will follow each other because they're nested inside this pre-composition. So if I want to add some global movement, not just to the edge of the text, I can use this. So I need to dial the amount way down, and then I can also affect the size. So if I click and drag the size, we can have something, kind of wobbly or something that just feels a bit hand drawn. Now we have the same issue with the evolution. So we can kind of test what the animation is going to look like just by clicking and dragging that about what the size should be. So, and the size is basically of the resolution of the texture that we can't see. Turbulent Displace is using you can pick different ones here, but these are basically fractal textures that aren't visible to us here, but that are acting on it behind the scenes. So I can keep dialing this down until I'm finding an overall general amount that's pretty good. So let's bring this evolution here. And so for this one, I'm not going to go to the trouble of setting the slider. I'm just going to set, let's say, maybe 10 evolutions here and see where that gets us. So the other thing about hand-drawn things are they are typically animated at 12 frames a second. And that goes back to old animations. When animation was first starting, they had to be very thrifty, and making 24 drawings or 24 frames a second for every second is very expensive. So they ended up having that. And that's where that hand-drawn look comes from, is that they held one frame twice. So every frame actually held up 2 frames. So there's a little bit of the staccato feeling to it. And you can actually get that inside of After Effects as well. Even though we've done this nice smooth animation that changes every single frame, after the fact, we can make it change to be on every 2 frames. So what we can do is use post-rise time. And I'll let you guys, futz with this effect to see, what the amount is and the size, all that kind of good stuff. But that's kind of the low-level granular stuff, the rough and edges, and then you can use Turbulent Displace to do bigger stuff. So I will just turn that back down. And now what we can do is go to posterize time. So let's go to time, posterize time. And basically we can set the frame rate after the fact. So let's set it to 12 instead of 24. So now when we play back, it'll actually hold every 2 frames. So if we zoom in here, they're very subtle effects. This is kind of more advanced level stuff. Even though I call the course for beginners, you're not a beginner after you learn this stuff. So if I frame through, every 2 frames are the same. So like this is the same as that one. I don't know if you can hear me typing back and forth. That frame is basically held. So every 2 frames is being held for 1 frame, or every 1 frame is being held for 2 frames, I guess I should say. So that makes it feel a bit more hand-drawn. So if we're doing handwritten things, that would make sense. We want to try to make it feel a bit more handwritten. So that's one way to do it with posterized time. So now we have the text written on. We use an effect in a cool way. We had expressions. We've done granular roughen edges. We've done big level stuff with turbulent displace. We've posterized the time. We've used echo to make this cool little graphic thing occur before. And now we have a pretty sweet animation. Now I want to finish this out with a bit of a little kind of, chef's kiss of a thing to do. So let's right click down here, go to new adjustment layer. And this is going to be the warp or the distort. Rename that. And an adjustment layer is simply that. It just adjusts everything beneath it. So there's nothing, it's not like a solid. There's nothing there actually. It's only to kind of hold effects basically. So we need to add an effect. So let's go to distort and let's go to the optics compensation. And what this does is it basically takes the warp out of lenses, but we can use it and animate it to our own effect and our own animation. So if I scrub this, you can kind of see it warps the image, but I want to go the other way because we're zooming into the image. So I want to zoom in with this kind of warped edges effect. So I'm going to reverse the lens distortion. And so I'm going to set a keyframe at the beginning here on the field of view. I'm going to go to the end and I'm going to ramp this up. And because it's an adjustment layer, it's going to affect everything beneath it. So that means the graphics, the text, the background, and it kind of marries everything together. And it makes this a little bit more dreamlike, if you will. So again, we're layering effects on. We got one cool thing and we're like, hey, how can we take this a little bit further? How can we take this another step further? And you just kind of keep doing that and keep doing that until you have an effect that you're happy with and an animation that you're happy with. So the one thing that I don't like is how quick the D goes off of the screen and the M. I want that to hang on up until it's about to fade out. So I want to take the distortion and I want it to just hang on just for a little bit and then it'll speed up right at the end. So there we go. I get that transition a little bit better. The other thing we can do is scale in or do something here that, because we have this point where nothing is happening, we could scale up really quickly. So let's go to the background. Let's hit U to bring up all the keyframes. And let's hit scale here. And let's move forward and scale up. So we have a little bit more movement. So we don't have kind of this dead zone here in the center that's not doing anything. And I'm going to do a little F9 on that so it's not as an abrupt change on the scale. Same thing on the distort. I'll hit U here, go here, hit F9. And I want to go into the graph editor because I don't want these to go totally flat. So I'm going to click and drag this, have it just kind of slow down a little bit like we were doing earlier. Do that same thing for the scale. So I'm going to click and drag that, and I don't want it to go totally flat. So I'll just take it just off of horizontal. So now it should just kind of slow down and then speed up. And I want this to go even faster at the end. So let's bring these keyframes in a little bit. This transition still isn't working as well. So I'm just going to keep tweaking this and make sure this isn't as flat. I think that's the issue. I don't want, let me zoom in here. Don't want it to go as flat as it's going. We'll bring this tangent in because I don't want it to overshoot the bottom here. I'll just tweak that. Now for this, I might actually bring this up even more. I'm holding Shift, and what I'm going to do is extend this out so it's slower and then it speeds up at the end. And I'm going to hit this down here to get a tangent. I'm going to drag this down so I get a nice sharp curve. That doesn't make sense, not a sharp curve. You get a nice increase right at the end. So I'm just going to exaggerate that even more. So now we have our final animation of the write-on effect with a little added fun stuff in there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.
Hi YouTube, and thanks for watching this Mastering Typography free preview, and you can watch the entire course at the link in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more free content like this, and as always, I will see you in class.